Ned Stark knelt on the rough stones of the Great September of Baelor, hands bound and heart pounding as fiercely as the surging crowds. He felt the press of eyes upon him, Southerners, most of them, people who did not know him as the Lord of Winterfell, but only as the man who had betrayed their king. The blazing sun ignited motes of dust around the pedestal where he was meant to meet his end, and each breath tasted of grit and fear. The name of Eddard Stark was an old one, known in every corner of Westeros, but never would he have imagined it would end like this. A public spectacle in a city that had already proven itself as labyrinthine and treacherous as a pit of vipers. Yet, in those moments, as the sword rose above him, Ned felt something stir in him. A certainty that the gods were not done testing him. He had resigned himself to death when he falsely confessed to treason, believing it necessary to spare his daughters any further pain or harm. He had done so in the hope of clemency, in the faint notion that King Joffrey, despite his cruelty, might spare a man who had bent the knee. Yet as he glanced across the courtyard, he saw Joffrey Baratheon's lips draw back in a triumphant sneer. The boy's hand flicked at his king's guard, a casual gesture with horrifying significance. This was no deliverance. This was showmanship, the easiest path to ensuring the Lannisters' hold on the realm. The air felt tight, and Ned felt an uncharacteristic bitterness in his chest. He had failed his family, his honor, everything. He closed his eyes, lips moving in a silent prayer to the old gods. Above, the executioner's blade caught the sunlight. The hush of the crowd seemed to solidify around them all, turning the scorching midday into a hush of timeless tension. Ned was sure this would be his last vision, the steel glinting overhead, his own reflection warping in the curve of the sword. But at the final instant, the clamor of many voices rose in a sudden swell. The roar of the city erupted, and Ned's eyes snapped open to see a commotion at the steps of the September. People were pushing, guards shouting. A group of gold-cloaked city watchmen shoved through the throng. Cries of confusion muddled together, words lost in the chaos. For a heartbeat, he wondered if this was some final cruelty of the new king, make a show of staying the execution only to bring it about again the next day. But then, through the haze, a new voice boomed, "Stop." By order of the Queen Regent. Cersei Lannister, face pale beneath her painted cheeks, had lifted a slender arm. Her green eyes flicked from Ned to the sword overhead. For whatever reasons, some cunning plot or late rethinking, she decided this was not the hour for Ned Stark's head to roll. Perhaps it was the sudden fear that the North would never bow if they slaughtered Ned like a dog, or that a parted head served no greater advantage than a living hostage. Perhaps it was some whim of politics, the result of frantic persuasion from those who recognized the strategic fiasco that would follow Ned's death. Either way, she signaled the executioner to halt. The gold cloak who had barked out the order pried Ned up, hauling him to his feet. The sword was lowered, though not without a hungry glare from the headsman whose white cloak marked him as one of the king's guard. Ned thought it might be Ser Island Payne, the mute headsman, though behind the visor of his helm was only a fearsome blankness. A hush fell over the crowd as they witnessed the drama unfold. The young king's face flared in surprise. He began to protest. Ned caught the words, "But my mother," before Cersei leaned in. Whatever she whispered to her son made the boy's features warp in sullen anger. But the next moment he barked his agreement to spare Ned for now. Then the guards yanked Ned forward, forcing him back to his knees. Cersei came near, her lips pursed into a semblance of a smile. "Lord Stark," she said softly, her tone icy with loathing, "the realm is not yet through with you. You will confess to your treason in front of the city, as you have, and I shall see you clapped in chains. We will await the pleasure of the council. Perhaps you shall find mercy, perhaps not. You owe your life to me." It was not mercy that Ned saw in her eyes, but the cunning mind of a woman who understood the board of power. Without question, she had some plan for him. His head swam, relief at not dying intermingling with the grim knowledge that this only postponed the day he might meet the same fate. Yet living for one more day meant the chance to save his daughters. He let out a breath he hadn't known he was holding. "I remain the Queen's loyal servant," he said with a bitterness that tasted like bile on his tongue. He was dragged away to the dungeons. On his way, he caught a glimpse of Arya, or at least a girl with messy auburn hair who stood behind the statue of Baelor. She had the posture of a cornered wildcat, so still yet so vibrantly present. His heart clenched. Sansa was nowhere in sight. With chains cutting into his wrists and the roar of the crowd rising in his ears, Ned struggled to keep from collapsing. He knew the South was a viper's den, but he had not realized how deeply its fangs had already sunk into him. In the blackness of his cell, time stretched out in a waking nightmare. No sunlight penetrated there, and it was impossible to tell day from night. Guards brought him stale bread and water. He choked them down without complaint. He tried to remain strong, but fear for his daughters gnawed at him. Varys, the master of whisperers, visited now and then, speaking in riddles about mercy, about secrets. Varys gently assured Ned that Sansa was being treated well, that Arya was nowhere to be found, though whether that meant she was safe or lost, Ned could not say. Each day or each moment he could not mark them bled into the next. Then, in the suffocating dark, an unexpected voice came one afternoon. "Lord Stark," it whispered. "There is a deal to be made." Ned turned his head, straining to see beyond the bars. The face outside was shrouded in torchlit shadows. "What deal?" Ned rasped. His throat felt cracked, as if he hadn't spoken in days. "The Queen is prepared to show you mercy if you agree to certain terms," the voice continued. It wasn't Varys. It had a coldness to it, an edge that reminded Ned of metal on stone. "You will give up your claim as Warden of the North. You will swear fealty to King Joffrey again, more formally and in writing. You will remain south. That is the offer. Accept it or refuse it, but do so quickly." Ned closed his eyes. Giving up the North was unthinkable. The ancient seat of the Starks had stood for thousands of years, as old as the land itself. But a dying man has few cards to play. And if it meant saving his daughters and the men who had stood by him, he might do it. But the thought burned in him like a brand. "And my daughters?" he croaked. "They will be kept safe in King's Landing?" As wards came the answer. "We assure you no harm shall come to them, provided you remain cooperative." Ned swallowed. He wanted to rage, to tear the bars from their hinges, but that would do nothing. The game was lost before it began. Yet in that moment, as he hovered on the precipice of despair, his mind reeled back to the promise he had made to his sister Lyanna, to the promises he'd made to King Robert, to the oath he swore before the gods in the presence of all men. He recognized a flicker of hope. "I will consider," he whispered. "Consider well, Lord Stark. The Queen will expect your answer on the morrow." Ned guessed it must be a high-ranking Lannister guard or official, given the imperious tone. In the quiet that followed, he knelt on the cold stones, the rattle of his chains echoing in the gloom. Should he accept the terms? They were monstrous, but refusing meant likely death. He might die with some ephemeral version of honor, but what good would it do his daughters? He had tried to do the honorable thing at every turn. He had tried to reveal the truth of Joffrey's birth. He had tried to trust in the system and justice. He had been beaten each time, and this was the last. Was it truly the last? He pressed his forehead to the cell wall, considering that sometimes survival itself was an act of defiance. When next the shadows shifted, time had passed, he could not say whether it was hours or days. At last, it was Cersei Lannister who arrived, accompanied by 2 gold-cloaked guards. Her emerald gown seemed too bright for the gloom, her blonde hair too lustrous. She stepped close to the bars, though not too close, and stared at Ned. He hated to see that mixture of pity and victory in her eyes. "I have your answer?" she asked. She sounded almost gentle, as if speaking to a sick child. Ned squinted at her, unshaven, exhausted. "I will sign the confession," he said. "I will relinquish my hold on the North if that is your will. I will do what you ask if you pledge, on your honor, to keep Sansa and Arya safe." Her lips curved. "On my honor, Lord Stark. And if you behave, you may yet see the North again. The king might even restore some measure of your lands once these unfortunate rebellions are settled." He was too tired to meet her manipulations with anger. He nodded, and she had the cell unlocked. The gold cloak seized Ned's arms, dragging him out. He was marched through torchlit corridors, the heat of day absent in the damp tunnels. At last, after what felt like a labyrinth's path, they entered a small council chamber with a table, parchment, ink, and quill. Varys stood in one corner, silent as a spider, and Lord Baelish was near the hearth, smirking. Cersei took her seat, gesturing impatiently. "Confess all," she said softly, "and sign your name." Ned stood at the table, his legs shaking. He read the parchment, a testament that he conspired against the crown, that he attempted to place Stannis Baratheon on the throne. Lies, but the same lies he had whispered at the September to save Sansa's life. His vision blurred. He forced his trembling hand to take up the quill and sign. Eddard Stark, the words ended up, black ink shining in the candlelight. Cersei exhaled with satisfaction. "Good. We shall let you live for now." Without ceremony, the guards carted Ned away to a marginally better cell, one with a single high window. There he remained under watch, but with the knowledge that perhaps, given time, he might find a way to save his daughters and himself. He thought of Robb, his boy now forced into the role of the Warden of the North. He thought of the Lords of the North, of their unyielding loyalty to House Stark. He prayed that his people would not rush into a disastrous war. But he knew them too well. The wolves would come, howling for blood. Cersei must know it too. Why spare him unless she hoped to negotiate with Robb or use him to quell the North's fury? Days passed, and Ned learned from the guards that Robb Stark had called his banners, that the River Lords under Hoster Tully were in arms. Word was that Tywin Lannister was massing his armies in the west. The smell of war was thick. Ned cursed his helplessness. He had been a soldier, a commander, a father, and a husband. Now he was caged, reliant upon the whims of those who took him prisoner. Still, a slender thread of hope remained. Life persisted. If life persisted, so might honor. At last, Cersei came to him again, this time accompanied by fewer guards. She wore a thoughtful frown, tension pinching the corners of her mouth. She wasted little breath on courtesies. Your son has the Riverlands behind him, and some houses of the Vale. The boy has proven himself unexpectedly dangerous. Ser Jaime has been captured in the Whispering Wood. Ned felt a rush of pride at the mention of Robb's victory. The Kingslayer captured? That was no small feat, but he kept his face an unreadable mask. Cersei continued, If you want to keep breathing, you will help me negotiate a truce. The North wants you freed. Perhaps something can be arranged. Her green eyes bored into him. I might persuade Joffrey to accept a peace settlement in exchange for Jaime's release. But we need the boy to stand down. We need you to ensure he stands down. Ned gave a nod. I will try, he said quietly, though in truth he wondered how much of Robb's trust he still retained. Would the North see him as a man who had betrayed everything by confessing to false treason? That thought gnawed at him. Nonetheless, a raven was brought and Ned was given parchment and quill to write. In his letter, he implored Robb to cease open war for the sake of his sisters and for the sake of the realm. He tried to wrap his words with paternal guidance, explaining that it was better to gain a negotiated settlement than to risk plunging the entire kingdom into a bloody war. He prayed the letter would find open ears. Pride in one's cause was never easily set aside. He recalled Robert Baratheon's fury at any sign of disloyalty. He dreaded what he might see in Robb's eyes if they met face to face again. Within 2 weeks, an answer arrived. Robb was willing to meet the Lannisters on neutral ground to discuss terms. The phrase offered the twins, though nobody trusted Lord Walder Frey to be truly neutral. Talks were slow. Ned remained captive, but at least his living conditions improved slightly. He now had a small cot and a pitcher of water that was changed daily. Sansa was brought to visit him once, guarded by 2 Lannister men-at-arms. She looked pale, frightened, but unhurt. Arya was still missing. The guard told Ned there were rumors she had escaped the city, possibly disguised as a beggar child. Ned prayed it was true. Then, one dawn, Ned was woken by a crash of a door. The gold cloaks marched in, unlocking his chains once more, and led him, blinking, into the sunlight of a courtyard within the Red Keep. They forced him onto a waiting horse, wrists still bound. He saw a column of Lannister knights, their red cloaks swirling in the dawn breeze, as well as a few men of the King Guard in their white armor. At their head, sitting astride a pale stallion, was Cersei Lannister and, beside her, the short, sharp-eyed figure of Tyrion Lannister, the so-called imp who stared at Ned with an unreadable expression. They set out from King's Landing under a banner of truce. People in the city stared and hissed, though fewer seemed outraged than Ned expected. Perhaps they had grown tired of the unending swirl of rumors and chaos. Perhaps the spectacle of Ned's near execution had simply lost its novelty. The caravan wove north, passing farmland scorched by skirmishes, crossing the Riverlands where the threat of war hovered like a storm. Lannister outriders fanned out to keep an eye on bandits or any Stark outriders who might test the truce. All the while, Ned kept silent, ignoring the jibes of some Lannister knights. He found himself looking often at Tyrion Lannister, who alone seemed uneasy with the entire affair. When they stopped to rest, Tyrion approached Ned, offering a skin of water. I do not enjoy these politics, Tyrion said with a small shrug. But needs must. My father wants Jaime back. You want your freedom. Perhaps we can arrive at a solution without bathing the continent in blood. Ned took the water and drank. We shall see, he murmured. Perhaps your father's needs and your sister's cunning will not coincide. Tyrion's eyes flicked. Indeed. At last, they came to the twins. Tall towers loomed on either side of the Green Fork, joined by the stone bridge that gave the crossing its name. Lord Walder Frey awaited them with his unctuous smile and his brood of heirs. A camp was already set up on the northern side of the river, displaying the Stark dire wolf banners. Ned felt an ache in his chest at the sight. Would Robb be there? Would Catelyn? They were ferried across under close watch. The tension was palpable, an entire war balanced on a hair's edge. By the time they reached the northern camp, Ned saw the rows of tents, the men in boiled leather and mail. He saw the gray direwolf on surcoats, and he saw Robb, standing tall beside Catelyn Stark. His son looked older than his years, grimness carved into his youthful features. Behind them stood the great Jon Umber, Roose Bolton, the Blackfish Brynden Tully, and many others. The banners of Tully and Stark fluttered. When Ned dismounted, a hush spread through the lines. Lannister men on one side, Stark men on the other. Robb strode forward, ignoring the Lannisters, his blue eyes fixed on Ned with a mixture of relief and hurt. "Father," he said, voice trembling. Ned wanted to embrace him, but his bound wrists stopped him. A gold cloak guard moved to interpose. Tyrion cleared his throat and signaled to remove Ned's bonds. They did so. Ned rubbed his wrists, wincing as the blood flowed back into them. Robb stood uncertain for a fraction of a moment, then seized Ned in a fierce hug. Ned closed his eyes, returning the embrace. The Stark men let out a muted cheer, though caution quickly reasserted itself given the presence of Lannisters. Catelyn approached, tears bright in her eyes, but she held herself with composure. "My lord," she breathed. "You live." Ned's heart caught in his throat. He laid a hand on her cheek. "We must have much to discuss," he said quietly. Then he turned to face the Lannisters, who had remained on horseback watchful. "Let us negotiate." They gathered within the stone hall of the twins, Walder Frey presiding like a smug cat over a feast. Despite the heightened stakes, Frey insisted on courtesy, on bread and salt, for none but a fool would break guest right. Yet everyone knew that Walder Frey was capable of extraordinary duplicity if it served his interests. Tension hung like the stench of rotted fish. Ned sat at the table with Catelyn and Robb flanking him. Opposite them were Tyrion Lannister, representing his father, and a silent, brooding Cersei Lannister, representing the crown. A few other lords dotted the space, mostly watchers. Lord Walder Frey perched at the head of the table, smirking, drumming his fingers. Ned recounted the terms that had been initially spoken of: Jaime Lannister in exchange for Ned Stark, a cessation of hostilities, and safe passage for Sansa Stark. The North would stand down, returning to their lands, while the Riverlords returned to theirs. In turn, the Lannisters would withdraw from any occupation. The fate of Arya remained uncertain, but Ned demanded a thorough search and safe conduct for her if she were found. Tyrion, for his part, insisted that the North not contest Joffrey's throne. They wanted an official recognition of Joffrey as the rightful king. Ned paled at that. Recognizing Joffrey was tantamount to supporting a lie. But the alternative was war and the possible deaths of his daughters. Robb's voice cut through. "We called our banners because we will not see my father murdered. If you release him and my sisters, we will ride home. But you cannot expect us to bow to a false king." Tyrion's eyes flicked to Ned. "Is that how you feel, Lord Stark? That the king is false?" Ned hesitated. He remembered how Robert had pointed to the boy's hair, how the Baratheons for centuries carried coal-black hair. He remembered the damning genealogies. The truth was unaltered, yet to speak it aloud now might doom them all. "I have confessed to treason," he said softly. "I have bent the knee. The realm knows my testimony. If I say differently now, it would be unwise." A flicker of relief crossed Tyrion's face. Cersei's expression remained neutral, but Ned thought he glimpsed a faint smirk. "So you will swear fealty to King Joffrey in public, before the entire realm?" Tyrion pressed. "That is the price we ask. You do that and the boy. King might be merciful with the rest of your demands." Silence settled. Ned heard the hiss of his own breath. He glanced at Catelyn, who looked stricken yet resolved. Then Robb clenched his fists. "You cannot do this, father," he growled. "We know the truth. If we bend the knee now, what stops them from it?" Catelyn placed a calming hand on Robb's forearm. "There is more at stake than pride. Sansa's life, Arya's life. If we continue the war, how many thousands of Northerners will die?" Robb's lips parted in frustration. Ned felt torn, caught between the love of his family and the bitter truth that, by acknowledging Joffrey, he was condoning a great lie. Nonetheless, if it saved lives, perhaps that was the lesser evil. "I will swear fealty," Ned said at last. "And in return, you will free my daughters and my men." You will withdraw from the Riverlands. You will guarantee the North's autonomy within the framework of the realm. Tyrion nodded slowly. I believe that can be done, provided that Jaime Lannister is returned to us unharmed. Agreed, Ned said. He saw Robb close his eyes in anguish. Jaime was the North's greatest leverage. Releasing him meant the Lannisters had no further reason to keep negotiating. But it was the only way, the only path that did not lead to more slaughter. Thus, a fragile peace was hammered out. The next few days were spent sealing the official documents, exchanging hostages and oaths. Jaime Lannister was brought forth from his makeshift captivity, bearing bruises but alive. When he saw Cersei, he sneered with sardonic relief. I hope you know what you're doing, sister, he muttered. Too much trust in Starks is a foolish thing. Cersei regarded him coolly. Not trust, dear brother, but necessity. Ned, likewise, was accompanied by Lannister guards at all times until each side had verified the terms. Finally, under the watchful eye of Lord Walder Frey, Ned spoke the words. I, Eddard Stark, do hereby reaffirm my fealty to King Joffrey Baratheon, the first of his name, and pledge the North to peace, so long as the rightful crown upholds its obligations to all lords of the realm. The words rang hollow, but they hung in the air, a vow that men would cling to, men who needed an end to war more than the truth of who fathered the king. Cersei dipped her head in a show of magnanimity. In turn, by the grace of the king, I restore Eddard Stark to his lands and titles, confirming him as Lord of Winterfell while appointing him Warden of the North once again to keep the peace. Let it be known that House Lannister does not forget honor. The last statement nearly made Ned choke on his indignation, but he kept his face composed. He glanced at Robb, who looked as though he wanted to slice the Lannisters then and there. Their lords behind him wore stony faces, uncertain whether this peace was genuine or just a pause in the game. Nonetheless, the oaths were made. The banners would be furled for now. When it was done, Ned was allowed to see Sansa, who was brought under guard from King's Landing. She nearly collapsed into his arms, sobbing with relief and still trembling in terror. Arya, unfortunately, had not been found, and the Queen's men claimed no knowledge of her whereabouts. Ned prayed that she had indeed escaped, that she might survive somehow. A short farewell was made with Tyrion Lannister, who parted with a slight bow, then with Cersei, who stared at Ned with an expression that almost seemed triumphant. I trust, Lord Stark, that you will hold to your oath and maintain peace in the North, she said quietly. Ned bowed stiffly. I have said my words. Thus, the Stark host and their lord returned north. The Lannisters headed back south to King's Landing, Jaime leading them, still favoring his side from his captivity. It seemed for a time that the realm might settle, albeit on uneasy foundations. The small folk, battered and bruised by the war's early stages, were relieved that the fighting had paused. The official line was that Ned Stark had confessed treason and been forgiven by a merciful King Joffrey, but the lords and ladies all whispered among themselves of what the real reasons might be. Ned tried not to dwell on it. He had to focus on his family, to reestablish order in the North, and to keep watch for any further Lannister scheming. Still, the seeds of suspicion had been sown. The rumor of Joffrey's parentage could not be easily silenced. Some said Stannis Baratheon was calling banners on Dragonstone, preparing to declare himself the rightful king. Others whispered that Renly Baratheon had fled south, forging alliances with the Tyrells. Chaos reigned behind the scenes, though outwardly, a veneer of peace took hold. When the Starks finally reached Winterfell, Ned dismounted in the courtyard with an exhale of such relief that he felt weak. He dropped to one knee and kissed the cold ground. Catelyn stood beside him, rubbing his shoulder, tears in her eyes. This was home, the place of their ancestors. Yet it felt changed. The people, servants, guards, small folk crowded forward, desperate for reassurance. Robb, still wearing mail, stepped in front of them all. Winterfell stands with you, father. We have held it safe in your absence. But the realm is no safer, is it? He asked quietly. Ned stood, gazing at Robb, whose youth could not hide the lines of worry etched there. No, Ned said. We have won a reprieve, not a lasting peace. And something more, something darker is looming beyond the petty squabbles of the South. Robb tilted his head. What do you mean? We have received reports from the Wall, Ned explained. Strange sightings, wildling incursions. Lord Commander Mormont wrote that the dead are rising, that the White Walkers may be stirring. Everyone in the South dismissed them as tall tales. But I know the old stories. Winter is coming. The words "winter is coming" echoed in the courtyard, carrying an unsettling weight. The northern lords believed in the old stories more readily than the Knights of the Reach or the Lords of the Westerlands. Robb nodded solemnly. We must prepare. Even if the South scoffs, we cannot ignore the warnings from the Night's Watch. Over the following months, Ned did all he could to bolster Winterfell's defenses and rally the North to readiness. He answered ravens from Castle Black, offering men and supplies to the Night's Watch. Food was stockpiled. The forging of weapons increased. Secretly, Ned worried that the realm might tear itself apart while the real enemy gathered strength in the icy wastes beyond the wall. The fragile peace with the Lannisters allowed him to focus on the North's preparation for an enemy far worse than southern armies. Sansa settled into Winterfell, though she often fell into bouts of sadness at Arya's absence. Catelyn tried to comfort her. Ned spent what time he could with her, encouraging her to find solace in the northern ways in the Godwood. Yet she missed King's Landing in some odd ways, its courtly splendor, its glamour. She was a young girl who had once dreamt of being a queen, wed to a handsome prince. Now those dreams had turned to ashes. She was betrothed to no one, her name tarnished by the rumors of her father's treason. Still, Ned saw steel forming in her spirit. Meanwhile, Bran and Rickon ran about the castle as if to chase away the ghosts. They asked many questions about the war, about the White Walkers, about the monstrous dire wolves in the forest. Ned answered them with gentle caution. He had once believed children should remain innocent as long as they could, but times were changing. Winterfell was relatively calm compared to the chaos in the south. Rumors came that King Joffrey had clashed with Stannis in a skirmish off the coast of King's Landing, that Renly Baratheon had declared himself king in Highgarden after marrying Margaery Tyrell, that the Lannisters were spread thin. Cersei was rumored to be consolidating power fiercely even as Tywin Lannister marched west to quell rebellions that had sprung up in the Riverlands once more. Ned's name flitted in those rumors. Some said he was forging an alliance with Stannis in secret, others that he was plotting with Renly, still others that he had grown complacent in his northern exile. Ned ignored them all. He had one goal, to prepare the North for the long night that was drawing closer. One day a raven arrived from the wall with unsettling tidings. White Walkers had been spotted. A patrol of rangers had vanished near the haunted forest, only for one man to return half-mad, babbling about blue-eyed corpses. Ned felt a chill deeper than any winter. He summoned his bannermen to Winterfell. The Great John came, as did Roose Bolton, Lady Mormont, and many others, each bringing retinues of men. They gathered in the Great Hall. Winterfell's ancient walls seemed to echo with the murmurs of anxious lords, uncertain but resolute. They listened as Ned read out the letter from the Lord Commander. The threat is real, it said. The others are stirring. We need men, we need weapons of dragonglass or Valyrian steel. We need the realm united or we will all fall. Roose Bolton's pale eyes flickered as he listened. The Great John let out a growl of frustration. Lady Mormont, tough as old oak, stood with arms folded. We can muster men, she said flatly. But what of the rest of Westeros? Will they stand with us or ignore our pleas until it's too late? Ned rubbed his beard, recalling Mormont's frustration with the southern kings. We will send ravens, he said. We will warn every great house. The White Walkers are not a northern fairy tale. They are real. We must stand together. Bolton's voice was cool. The Lannisters have not proven the most reliable allies. Why should they help us now? We are one slip away from war with them. And the Baratheons waged their petty feud for the Iron Throne. We have no reason to expect help from any of them. Ned closed his eyes. We must try. The living must unite against the dead. If the North must stand alone, we will do so, but I pray the rest of the realm sees sense. He paused, taking a steady breath. I will go to the wall myself. I will see with my own eyes what threat we face and bring what support I can to the Night's Watch. The lords murmured, unsettled. Robb, at Ned's side, inhaled sharply. Father, if you go, what if the Lannisters attack while you're away? They might see it as an opportunity. Ned's gaze swept the hall. That is why you will remain at Winterfell, my son. You will rule in my stead. Keep the peace, keep our borders strong. If the worst comes, call the banners. But for now, we must assume good faith. We must prepare for a threat that doesn't respect the petty lines of kings and lords. We can handle southern politics if and when they come. It was decided. Ned Stark would ride to the wall. He took a retinue of soldiers, among them some of his most trusted men, to show the Night's Watch that Winterfell stood beside them. With him came Jon Snow, who had remained at the wall after joining the Night's Watch. In the books or show, Jon had parted ways with Ned, but here, let us imagine that Jon's vow was the same. He'd gone north to the wall while Ned had gone south to King's Landing. The father and bastard son had not seen each other in many moons. Their reunion was tempered by the forbidding reality of their duties. They met at Castle Black. The sight of the ancient stronghold stirred Ned's memories of the last time he journeyed here with Benjen Stark. Jon was there, waiting in the courtyard, tall and lean, his hair grown longer. He wore the all-black of a Night's Watch brother. When he saw Ned, he stiffened, uncertain. Then a smile broke across his features, bittersweet. "Father," he said, voice husky. Ned dismounted and embraced Jon. He held him at arm's length, pride and sorrow mingling. "You have grown," he murmured. "I am sorry I was not here to see it." Jon lowered his eyes. "A lot has happened. You heard about what lies beyond the wall. That is why I'm here." Jon nodded, glancing at the vast ice of the wall behind them. "Lord Commander Mormont has led expeditions. Many do not come back. We have seen whites, father, dead men walking. Sam Tarly and I," he broke off, his voice catching. "I killed one. With fire." Ned's heart hammered. Hearing these words confirmed his worst fears. "We will speak to Mormont at once." Inside the dim corridors of Castle Black, they found the Lord Commander, Jeor Mormont, a bear of a man, gray of hair and stern of face. He greeted Ned respectfully, explaining the dire situation. He showed Ned relics they had found, corpses that had risen, bits of armor rumored to belong to the ancient foe. Mormont's tone was urgent. "Lord Stark, we have never needed help more. The wildlings claim the White Walkers are gathering an army. Tormund Giantsbane and other free folk have come to the wall asking for amnesty, saying something even worse chases them south. We do not have the men to hold every castle along the wall, let alone meet an army in the field." Ned nodded grimly. "I have brought a few hundred from the north. More can come. But we need the rest of the realm. We must unite. I will send ravens again, urging them all to see reason. Even the Lannisters. If the threat is as grave as you say, every sword will be needed." Mormont's mouth tightened. "I've tried sending ravens to the south. Some do not return. Others come back with politicking nonsense, saying the war for the throne leaves no resources to spare. Fools, all of them." Ned set his jaw. "Then I will ride south again to speak with the kings. Joffrey, Renly, Stannis, whoever might call themselves king, they must be made to understand." Jon's eyes flicked with alarm. "Father, they might not listen. If they see you as a threat, eh?" Ned placed a hand on Jon's shoulder. "I have no wish to threaten them. Only to warn them. I must do this. The realm cannot be left blind to the real war that is coming." Thus began Ned Stark's second, more perilous journey through Westeros. This time he was not a naive hand of the king trying to unravel a southern conspiracy. This time he was a man on a mission to save the living from a foe older than any monarchy. He carried letters from Jeor Mormont, accounts written by Samwell Tarly detailing the battles with the Whites, sketches of strange artifacts recovered in the far north. Alongside him rode a small but capable force of northern soldiers. Jon Snow remained at the wall to continue his duties, though he parted from Ned with reluctance. They rode first to Winterfell, where Ned conferred with Robb. "The realm does not rest," Robb warned. "While you ride to speak with these kings, what if some use the opportunity to attack our lands? The Lannisters might break their truce." Ned's gaze was firm. "Guard the north. Rally our men. But hold peace as long as you can. The moment I return or the moment you have proof of betrayal, then call the banners." Robb nodded, though tension radiated from him. "As you say." Catelyn, who had endured so much, accepted Ned's plan with a resigned sigh. "I only hope they will listen." "I hope so too," Ned said. "Because if they do not, we face an enemy that cannot be reasoned with, that does not parley, that only kills." Ned's next destination was the seat of King Joffrey Baratheon, King's Landing. It felt strangely full circle, returning to the place where he'd nearly lost his head. Accompanied by a small retinue, Ned approached the gates. He had sent ravens in advance, requesting an audience in the name of the common defense of the realm. To his mild surprise, he was allowed in, though not without a heavy escort of gold cloaks. The city smelled the same. The stench of too many people crammed too close together, a mix of spices and sewage. Streets parted for his group. Townsfolk stared. Some hissed insults. He was the traitor who had confessed. Some recognized him from the fiasco in the Great September. But Ned kept his head high, focused on his purpose. In the Red Keep, he was led into the throne room, that towering chamber with the Iron Throne perched on its dais. Joffrey sat there, older by some months, though still possessing that haughty sneer. Cersei stood at his side, her face composed. Ned noted that the old counselors Varys, Pycelle, Baelish were arrayed about the hall, though Baelish had a strangely distracted air, as if he was juggling a separate game in his mind. A hush fell. Ned knelt, because to refuse would be to invite immediate hostility. "Your Grace," Ned began, "I come not for politics, but with grave tidings from the wall." Joffrey's voice rang out sharply. "You come to me after your treason, demanding my audience for ghost stories?" Cersei lifted a hand to calm him. "Let Lord Stark speak." Ned rose. "There are nightmares beyond the wall, Your Grace. White Walkers, an ancient foe from the long night. The Night's Watch has seen them. They raise the dead to serve them. I have come to beg the realm's aid. If the North stands alone, we may fall, and the dead will march south." The courtiers murmured in disquiet. Joffrey let out a sharp laugh. "You bend the knee and pledge your loyalty, then you come with talk of dead men walking? My armies are fighting real wars, Stark, not chasing shadows." Ned set his jaw. "Your Grace, this threat is real. If you continue the petty wars against your uncles, we will all be lost. The Night's Watch needs men, steel, and alliances. If we do not band together, it won't matter who sits on that throne." A hush. Cersei eyed Ned. "Lord Stark, your concerns might be genuine, but you must understand. We face enemies in Stannis, in Renly, in Greyjoy rebels. Our resources are stretched thin." Ned gestured to a chest that a northern guard carried. It was opened, revealing black fragments of what looked like obsidian, as well as an odd pale arm that had been kept in ice, said to belong to a white. Gasps erupted across the throne room. Some cowered. Some stared in disbelief. Baelish raised an eyebrow with theatrical shock. Joffrey recoiled. "What is that abomination?" he demanded. Ned's tone was grim. "Proof. Dragonglass is said to harm the White Walkers. This limb was severed from a corpse that walked. If you doubt me, send your own men to the wall to investigate. But do not ignore this. Winter is coming, and with it, the end of the living if we do nothing." For a moment, uncertain silence reigned. Then Cersei turned to Joffrey. "My son, perhaps we should consider sending an envoy. Let us confirm the truth of Lord Stark's claims. If indeed the threat is real, we can muster armies once we have finished subduing Stannis." Joffrey scowled, but he saw the fear in the eyes of those around him. Perhaps some survival instinct stirred. "Very well," he said at last. "We will send an envoy to the wall. Ser Meryn Trant will lead a party. If we find Lord Stark has lied, his head will adorn the city walls. If we find truth, we shall see." Ned exhaled slowly, suspecting that was the best he would get. He wanted a full mobilization. Instead, he had a promise to investigate. It was better than outright dismissal. He bowed, turning to leave. A voice called out, "Lord Stark," and he turned to see Cersei. She approached, voice low. "I hope for all our sakes that you are mistaken. But I doubt you are. The realm cannot afford these monsters. Thank you for bringing proof." Ned didn't trust the flicker of sincerity in her eyes, yet he nodded. "It is the duty of every lord to protect the realm, Your Grace. I only pray we can stand together." He departed King's Landing soon after, mindful that lingering would only give them cause to trap him again. His next target was to reach out to Stannis Baratheon and to Renly Baratheon, if possible. He could not fathom traveling all the way to the Stormlands and then the Reach, but ravens had been sent. If neither king answered, Ned might have to go in person. He felt the weight of thousands of lives pressing on him. Word came that Daenerys Targaryen had risen in the east with dragons. At first, Ned dismissed it as rumor, but then more credible reports emerged. 3 dragons, small yet growing, had been hatched. She had begun conquering parts of Slaver's Bay. Though across the sea, that power dragons could shift the entire balance. Perhaps Dragonfire would be key in the war against the undead. Ned shivered at the memory of Aerys Targaryen's madness, but if the tales of the White Walkers were true, maybe Dragonfire was the realm's best hope. He sent a raven to the east as well, explaining the threat, hoping somehow the Mother of Dragons might heed the call to defend Westeros. Time wore on. Ned traveled the Crownlands, the Riverlands, urging lords to take the threat seriously. Many were skeptical, some afraid. Some recognized that if the North was wrong, it meant waging an expensive campaign for no reason. Others said they would wait for the Lannisters or the Baratheons to commit first. The swirl of petty politics remained an obstacle at every turn. Yet Ned pressed on, unwavering in his duty. The glimpses of horror he'd seen in the relics from the wall drove him forward. Honor demanded no less. Meanwhile, winter's chill spread earlier than expected, creeping from the north. Snow fell in the neck, an ill omen, and many small folk whispered that a long night was coming. Then, a raven from Castle Black arrived, bearing a single coded message: "The wall is attacked. Whites in force. The Night's Watch is hard-pressed." Send help at once. Ned's heart pounded. The war had truly begun. There was no more time for negotiations or half-measures. He turned his horse north, riding with all haste back to Winterfell. Along the journey, he stopped at every lord's keep he could, demanding they send men to the wall. Some refused or hemmed and hawed, but a surprising number answered. The rumors of the Walking Dead had grown. Fear was a powerful motivator. By the time Ned reached Winterfell, a host of thousands was gathering. Robb had called the banners again. The lords who once marched south to rescue Ned from the Lannisters now marched north to rescue all Westeros from a threat far darker. The trek to the wall became a procession. Hardy northern warriors, spurred by tales from returning rangers, marched behind Ned Stark. He carried the banner of the dire wolf, not to fight other men but to stand against the ancient enemy. At the same time, word arrived from the east that Daenerys Targaryen had landed on Dragonstone with her dragons, though her ambitions remained uncertain. Ned prayed she would see the real war, not just the Iron Throne. When they reached the wall, the sight was more frightening than Ned had imagined. The gates of Castle Black stood battered, the yard stained with blackened patches of blood and gore. A grim-faced Jon Snow met them, eyes haunted. They came in the night, he said simply. We fought them off, but we lost many. The White Walkers didn't join the main attack. They lurk in the darkness, sending hordes of whites to probe our defenses. Ned embraced Jon fiercely. We have reinforcements, he murmured. We will hold. Out on the ice, the silhouettes of more undead forms prowled. Eyes glowed blue in the darkness. The far north was a land of silent dread. The men pitched camp, though few could sleep knowing the enemy was so close. Plans were made with Lord Commander Mormont. They would defend Castle Black, Eastwatch, and the Shadow Tower as best they could, rotating men. Scouts reported an ever-growing mass of whites in the distance, free folk among them, entire villages reanimated. Fear wrapped every heart in cold hands. Yet Ned saw a flicker of hope in the unwavering discipline of the North's men, in the steeled faces of the Night's Watch, in Jon's determination. More news trickled in. Some southern knights had arrived, sent by King Joffrey, Ser Marantrant's expedition, joined by others who had begun to grasp the severity of the threat. Ned had no love for that King's Guard, but he welcomed any swords. Word also spread that Stannis Baratheon, rallying to a cause he deemed righteous, was sailing for Eastwatch, possibly to place himself as the champion of the realm. Others whispered Renly had been assassinated by shadowy sorcery, removing one claimant from the board. Ned felt a pang of sorrow at the idea that war continued even now. Yet every ally was desperately needed. At last, the watchers on the wall sounded the horn, 3 blasts for White Walkers. Ned stood atop the great ice rampart, the wind cutting through his cloak. He gazed into the swirling snow. In the distance, shapes moved, an army of the dead. Among them, lit by the pale moonlight, rode tall, pale figures with glowing blue eyes, clad in armor of ice. The White Walkers had come in force. Below, the men readied themselves. Torches flared, archers loaded dragonglass-tipped arrows, swords were coated with dragonglass edges or readied with any scrap of Valyrian steel that could be found. The gates were barred, boiling pitch heated. Great horns boomed. Ned felt the old Stark words echo in his mind. Winter is coming. The first wave of whites clashed against the defenses, a nightmare of thrashing limbs, rotting faces, silent fury. The men fought valiantly, plunging dragonglass daggers into undead flesh, hurling firebombs. Yet the horde was vast. On the ramparts, Ned led a group of archers, loosing arrow after arrow. To his left, Ser Marantrant fought as grimly as any man, cursing under his breath. To his right, the great Jon roared defiance, hacking down one white after another. Meanwhile, the White Walkers themselves loomed behind their forces, seeming to direct the carnage with cruel intellect. Then Ned saw a figure approaching through the swirling snow, taller than the rest, wearing spiked ice armor with a crown of horns. The Night King, if the legends were true. A cold dread swept Ned. Legends spoke of him as an ancient Stark, or perhaps something older, a fiend from the dawn of days. He raised a hand and the dead battered the gate with renewed force. The timbers groaned. Men shouted. Ned realized they could not simply hold the walls. They needed to meet that threat head-on, or it would tear them apart from within. A warhorn sounded from the east. Through the swirling flakes, Ned glimpsed a fleet of ships approaching Eastwatch by the sea. The banners of the Flaming Heart and the Stag emblazoned. Stannis had arrived. Another horn from the west signaled more arrivals. Wildlings, led by Tormund Giantsbane, who had allied with the Night's Watch for survival. They hammered the whites on the flank. Relief soared in Ned's chest. Perhaps they had a chance. If only the living could stand united for a single night. Maybe they could stem the tide of darkness. The gates finally splintered under the assault. Whites poured into Castle Black's courtyard. Men fought in brutal close combat. Jon Snow, sword blazing with dragonglass inlays, led a furious counterattack. Atop the wall, Ned watched in horror as the White Walkers advanced. Their breath frosted the air, turning the ramparts slick with ice. One of them ascended the stairs in a terrifyingly swift motion. Ned drew his Valyrian steel sword. Ice, which had once been lost but was recovered through the fragile peace with the Lannisters, or so we might imagine in this alternative tale, and faced the creature. The White Walker's eyes glowed. It wielded a blade of such cold brilliance that frost rimed the stones near it. They clashed. For the first time in his life, Ned Stark fought a being not of mortal flesh. Each strike threatened to shatter his arms from the force, but the Valyrian steel held. Sparks of ice flew when their blades met. The creature hissed, a sound that cut like a razor. Ned pressed forward, drawing upon every ounce of skill and will. He remembered the godwood, the vows, the death of his father and brother. He remembered Lyanna. He remembered what was at stake. His blade slid across the White Walker's chest, leaving a crack in the pale armor. The being recoiled, screeching, and Ned pivoted, burying ice through its core. A chill shot up his arms, nearly numbing him. With a crystalline shatter, the walker disintegrated into shards of ice, collapsing into the wind. In the courtyard, Tormund's wildlings had joined the men of the Night's Watch, both locked in savage struggle with the Whites. Ser Meryn Trant lost half his men but held the line. The Greyjohn roared with the ferocity of a man possessed, swinging a flaming torch in one hand and a sword in the other. Then, through the swirling battlefield, Ned saw the Night King stand upon a rise of ice, raising both arms. The fallen Whites twitched. Some scattered across the field. They stirred, reanimated once more. The living men groaned in terror. How could they defeat an enemy that refused to stay dead? Amid the gloom, a thunderous roar ripped the night. Fire blossomed in the sky. Ned's eyes snapped up to behold the silhouette of a dragon. A second, then a third. Enormous wings flapped, stirring snow into a storm. Ned felt his breath catch. Daenerys Targaryen had arrived, leading her dragons overhead. The creatures unleashed jets of flame upon the undead horde. Where fire touched the Whites, they shriveled, turning to ash. Cheers rang out among the living, renewed hope surging through the fray. Upon a draconic mount, Daenerys, her silver-gold hair whipping in the wind, guided her children. The undead host burned in swaths of green and orange flame. The White Walkers shrank away from the dragon fire, their ice weapons melting. Meanwhile, Stannis Baratheon's men approached from the east, joining the fray at Castle Black. The combined armies of the living pressed forward, dividing and burning pockets of Whites. In that conflagration of steel, fire, and ice, the dead reeled. The Night King locked eyes with Daenerys in the sky, lifting a lance of ice. With a motion that crackled the air, he hurled it. The spear soared upward. One of the dragons twisted away, but not fast enough. The spear sank into its flank, and the dragon roared in agony, crashing into the battlements in a spray of ice and stone. Men scattered, screaming. Daenerys was thrown from her mount, but her other dragons swooped beneath her just in time, carrying her to safety. Ned saw the third dragon, black as midnight, swoop down behind the Night King, scorching the ground. The Night King turned, unaffected by the flame, but forced to retreat from the swirling inferno. On the ramparts, Ned clutched ice, covered in frost and gore, staring down as the lines of undead began to falter. Whites collapsed under dragon fire. The White Walkers, seeing their advantage slip, melted back into the darkness, the Night King vanishing into the swirling snow. Slowly, painfully, the living gained ground, pushing the dead from the courtyard out through the shattered gate, back into the wilderness. Dawn found Castle Black battered but still standing. Corpses of men and Whites littered the yard. Fire smoldered. One dragon lay dead, its side pierced. Another was wounded but alive. Daenerys Targaryen stood in the yard, smudged with soot, tears streaking her cheeks as she gazed upon her fallen dragon. Stannis Baratheon marched in, face grim, acknowledging Ned Stark with a curt nod. Tormund Giantsbane spat out a tooth and laughed bitterly at the fragile victory. Jon Snow, exhausted, slumped against the wall, still clutching his sword. Ned Stark sank to his knees, ignoring the pain in his limbs. They had won a battle, but the Great War was just beginning. The Night King had been forced to retreat, but he would return, likely stronger. The living had proven they could unite, at least for a night, under a single cause. Now Ned realized the true test was whether they could remain united to finish what they had started. Because if they faltered, if they resumed their squabbles, the long night would devour them all. In the courtyard, men and women of many lands mingled in weary relief. Northmen, crows, wildlings, Dragonstone knights, Dothraki who had accompanied Daenerys. Each had lost friends and allies. Each had stared into the blue eyes of death and emerged breathing. For the moment they stood as one. Ned gathered them, or what leaders he could find. Daenerys, Stannis, Tormund, Lord Commander Mormont, Ser Davos Seaworth, Stannis's right hand, and others. They met in the common hall, the smell of smoke heavy in the air. Silence reigned for a time, as no one knew quite what to say. Finally, Ned's voice, weary and gentle, broke the hush. We must press our advantage, or at least hold this advantage. The White Walkers will come again. We need more dragonglass, more Valyrian steel, more men. We must unify. Whatever claims to the throne you hold, I beg you, set them aside until this is done. We face annihilation. Stannis glowered, but he nodded. I have seen the enemy. You speak truth, Lord Stark. Duty before ambition. Once the others are destroyed, then we can settle who is king. Daenerys, eyes red from tears, rested a hand on her surviving dragons. I care not for the Iron Throne if the land it rules is turned to ice. I will fight with you until these creatures are gone. Then I will ask the realm to accept me as queen, but let that be decided another day. Tormund gave a harsh laugh. We free folk only want to survive. The rest is your Game of Thrones. But we'll help you, because we know what's out there. Lord Commander Mormont nodded. The Night's Watch stands, as it always has, against the darkness. Ned felt a surge of cautious hope. Then we stand together. We shall fight for the living. He paused, gazing at each face. So different, so unlikely a coalition. Then he breathed. We have lost many. We will lose more. But if we stand as one, we can drive the Night King into the darkness again. We can protect our homes, our children, all that we love. Let that be our cause. Silence settled, solemn and resolute. Their alliance was forged in necessity and blood. It would not be easy. Old grudges ran deep and the White Walkers would strike again. But Eddard Stark, a man once condemned to death in the name of petty politics, now stood at the center of a coalition that spanned the whole continent. The Great War against the Night King had truly begun, and in this new future, Ned Stark would be there to lead the charge, to remind them, always, what was at stake and what it meant to protect the living in the face of the cold and relentless night. And so, with dawn's first rays banishing the shadows, Ned Stark emerged from the battered gates of Castle Black, stepping among the scorched corpses of the Whites. He looked north where the horizon glimmered with ice and silent foreboding. The war was not won, it had barely begun. But for the first time, men, women, knights, free folk, dragons, and exiled kings all stood side by side. Perhaps in this new age the living might yet triumph. Perhaps Ned Stark's survival, an echo of the old god's will, was the pivot upon which the realm's fate turned. He took a cleansing breath of the crisp air, let the cold fill his lungs. He set his shoulders. Winter had come, but so too had hope. And when the horns sounded again, the living would be ready. Ned Stark stood within the courtyard of Castle Black, surrounded by the aftermath of the night's furious battle. Smoke still curled from the scorched carcasses of Whites, and broken arrows littered the trampled snow. His heart was heavy from the sight of so many dead brothers of the Night's Watch, wildlings who had fought bravely beside them, northern soldiers who had followed him here from Winterfell, and even knights sworn to King Stannis. Yet the living walked among these corpses, battered and exhausted but alive. In that fragile dawn light, Ned felt a solemn gratitude they had made it through the night. But the cost had been high, and their victory was only temporary. He took in the pale glow that crept over the snow-laden battlements. The storm of the night had lessened, though the chill remained sharp, biting at his cheeks and hands. Every breath he drew tasted of ash and regret. Somewhere out beyond the battered gates, the White Walkers had pulled back, lost in the endless white distance. They would come again, that much was certain. The Night King himself had appeared to oversee the attack, a presence that chilled the marrow. But for now, the living had space to breathe, to take stock, to nurse their wounded. Stannis Baratheon strode across the courtyard in his dented breastplate, flanked by a few grim-faced knights. His war banner, the crowned stag amid a burning heart, hung in tatters, caked with soot. He looked older than he had weeks ago, the lines of worry etched deeper into his brow. The news had traveled quickly. One of Daenerys Targaryen's dragons lay dead near the eastern wall, still smoldering, its black scales dull and cracked where the Night King's ice spear had struck. Yet the presence of the other two dragons was a symbol of hope few had dared dream of. Ned glanced skyward and spotted the faint silhouette of one circling, keeping a wary watch over Castle Black. Daenerys herself stood near the remnants of a collapsed section of the wall, her silver-gold hair tangled from the fierce wind, her eyes red-rimmed from tears of grief at her fallen dragon. Ser Jorah Mormont lingered close, along with a handful of Dothraki who had crossed the narrow sea with her. Grey Worm and a few Unsullied gathered the wounded, their discipline never wavering. It was a sight out of some fever dream. Targaryen forces, Baratheon soldiers, Stark bannermen, wildlings, and men of the Night's Watch all in one place, all fighting side by side. If Ned had not been living it, he might have doubted such an alliance was possible. He moved slowly through the aftermath, offering a word of thanks where he could, stopping to help shift broken timbers. Jon Snow was there, black cloak crusted with ice, giving quiet orders to a group of watchful wildlings. The boy, no, the young man, had proven himself many times over, commanding men in the face of terror. When their eyes met, Ned saw the worry in his son's face. The same question echoed everywhere. What now? They clustered near the yard where an improvised pyre was being built to burn the husks of the whites. Even a single sliver of undead flesh might be reanimated, so fire was their only sure disposal. A hush settled as more men and women emerged from within the keeps, carrying their dead. Some of the bodies bore the black of the Watch, some wore the rough furs of the free folk, others wore no distinct marking, words or travelers who had joined the struggle. A few steps away, the great Jon Umber stood with stoic sorrow, his head bowed for the fallen Northerners. The men of House Mormont, led by a fierce lady brandishing a bare sigil, had lost many to the initial wave of the undead. All shared grief, the wariness of each other's old grudges lingered beneath the surface. Ned placed a hand gently on the Greyjohn's shoulder, offering what little comfort he could, then turned to address a cluster of the highest-ranking survivors: Stannis, Daenerys, Tormund Giantsbane, Lord Commander Jeor Mormont, Jon Snow, and a few others who had gathered. Even Ser Marentrant, face streaked with sweat and grime, lingered at the edges. They formed a semicircle of leaders, bound not by fealty to one crown but by necessity. Stannis was first to speak. "We need to strike back before the fiends have time to regroup," he said, gesturing at the distant whiteness beyond the wall. "I saw them retreat. They'll be reassembling. We cannot allow the Night King to vanish into the wilderness only to return at a moment of his own choosing." Daenerys rubbed at her reddened eyes, pain and fury twisting her features. "We have but 2 dragons left," she said, voice tight. "Drogon and Rhaegal can still fight, but Viserion is gone, killed by the Night King's spear. I won't risk my remaining children in a blind pursuit, not when the others might be lying in wait to strike them from the sky." Tormund spat onto the snow. "Chasing the walkers in their own territory is madness. You don't know the wild lands beyond the wall. That's their domain, filled with ice caves, canyons, dead forests haunted by worse than whites. We have thousands of living men here, but they're exhausted and the snowdrifts alone could break an army." Lord Commander Mormont nodded gravely. "The Watch knows these lands. We've scouted them for centuries, though not always deeply. The others hold every advantage in the frozen shore, the Frostfangs, all the hidden valleys. An offensive could end in disaster." Stannis' jaw tightened. "And if we wait for them to come to us again, we risk being worn down by wave after wave. The living are not unlimited. We've lost a significant number already." Ned listened carefully, his gaze shifting from one speaker to the next. A year or 2 ago, he would never have imagined himself playing mediator between such disparate powers. But fate or the old gods had placed him here. He recalled the swirling madness of the last night's attack, the masked whites, the presence of the Night King, that uncanny figure who had glided through the snow with an unnatural silence. If they failed to unite fully, if they let suspicion or old grudges rend them apart, they would be devoured by darkness. He cleared his throat, voice soft but carrying. "If we march north into the wild, we risk being surrounded. But if we remain holed up here, we cede the initiative and let the others choose where and when to strike. So we require a plan that balances the two." Ser Jorah Mormont spoke up quietly. "The dragons are our greatest advantage, aside from Dragonglass and Valyrian steel. But the enemy showed they can strike from a distance with those ice spears. Charging deeper into the Northlands might give them too many opportunities." Jon stood straighter, a look of determination crossing his face. "We've heard rumors of a place called the Fist of the First Men, an ancient ring fort in the mountains north of here. The Watch sometimes used it as a vantage point. If we hold it, we could create a forward position to harass the others, drawing them into more open conflict. We'd have higher ground and the ring fort's defenses. Jeor Mormont allowed a small nod. We've used that site before, though never in the face of an enemy like this. Still, it might serve as a staging post if we wanted to keep the pressure on. Stannis studied the ground, arms folded. Better than huddling behind these broken gates waiting to be overrun. I say we muster a sizable force, fortify the ring fort, and force the others to come to us there. Daenerys's mouth tightened. But it means dividing our forces between Castle Black and the Fist. We'd have to maintain supply lines in Savage territory. If those lines are cut, men at the ring fort will starve or freeze. Ned nodded. We'd need coordination. We could also send riders to the west, toward the Shadow Tower, see if the men there can advance along the hills or if Tormund's people know safe passages. The free folk will be crucial in guiding us, if they will. Tormund gave a shrug. My folk are here to survive, not play at your strategies, but we'll do our part so long as it helps us kill the dead. Stannis let out a breath that steamed in the frigid air. Very well. I suggest we prepare to make a push in a day's time, allow the men a chance to rest and bury their dead, but no more than that. Each hour we delay, the Night King recovers and grows stronger. Daenerys glanced at the remains of her fallen dragon, dark smoke curling from the ribs. I will remain here until I see the Viserions' final rites. Then I'll help lead the bulk of my forces north. Drogon is the largest and fiercest of my children. He can ferry me to the ring fort if you truly mean to hold it. Regal may be enough to protect Castle Black in my absence. Ned lifted his eyes to the swirling gray sky. We must be sure the entire realm is aware of what's happening here. If other armies remain squabbling in the south, we risk fighting alone. I trust some of your ravens have gone out, Lord Commander. Jeor Mormont nodded. Dozens to every corner of Westeros. Some will have arrived at Winterfell, White Harbor, the Eyrie, wherever we thought men might still muster. Though whether they heed the call or not is another matter. The meeting broke with a reluctant consensus. They would send a strong force north to the Fist of the First Men within a day or two, while the remainder of their men tried to refortify Castle Black. Tormund would gather additional free folk from the west if any remained who had not already joined them. Daenerys would hold a short funeral for her lost dragon, then offer one of her remaining two to the offensive. Stannis would lead many of his own knights forward. The rest would stay behind with Jon Snow, Ser Davos Seaworth, and Lord Commander Mormont to ensure Castle Black did not fall in the meantime. Ned, for his part, felt compelled to join the forward push. He could not simply stand idle while others risked their lives in the heart of the cold wilderness. Besides, his presence might encourage any northern men who had doubts. Men drifted away from the courtyard, returning to their tasks. Tending the wounded, salvaging weapons, collecting dragonglass arrowheads from crates that had arrived from Dragonstone, or that the Watch had mined from old caches. Ned lingered a moment beside Jon, feeling a father's protective impulse. Jon, I had thought to bring you with me north, he said quietly. But the Night's Watch needs you here. You understand. Jon's brow furrowed. I understand, father. Yet it feels wrong to let you ride off into danger without me. Ned put a hand on Jon's shoulder. It's the same fear I've faced since you first drew breath. A father never wishes to place his children in danger. The men here will need your steady leadership if the others strike again. You've proven yourself a commander, Jon. The Watch looks to you even more than they look to some of their officers. And Castle Black is critical. If it falls, all the realm is open. Jon's face remained troubled, but he nodded. I'll do my duty. Send word if you need anything. Ned clasped Jon's shoulder once more before releasing him. I will. Keep an eye on Regal. A dragon is a powerful ally if the dead return in force, but remember the risk of those ice spears. Jon managed the faintest of smiles. I'll keep that in mind. They parted. Ned took stock of the swirling activity in the yard, exhaustion pulling at his limbs like lead weights. He had not truly slept in days, stolen only moments of rest here and there. Yet he could not collapse. Too many responsibilities demanded his attention. With a heavy sigh, he moved to help gather men for the upcoming expedition, speaking quietly with the northern banners who had followed him as well as with the great Jon, who refused to let Ned go north without him. Hours later, the sun rose higher, though it provided little warmth. Over by the breached gate, Daenerys Targaryen had arranged a makeshift pyre for the body of her dragon, Viserion. The carcass was colossal, spanning nearly the length of the yard. The close-set scales were black and gold, but they had dulled to a grayish color in death. A hush fell over the watchers. Even the roughest wildlings took no joy in the death of such a magnificent creature. Daenerys herself stood before the dragon's head, tears frozen on her cheeks, the wind whipping her hair about. She wore a heavy fur cloak offered by the men of the north, but beneath it she still carried herself like a queen. She spoke no long eulogy, only a few words in her Valyrian tongue that sounded like a lament, then raised a torch. Light shimmered in her violet eyes as she stared at the face of Viserion one last time. Flames spread over the wooden beams that had been placed around the dragon's body. Thick, oily smoke curled upward. Some watchers bowed their heads. Others studied Daenerys with a mixture of wonder and pity. The funeral smell mingled with the acrid stench of white pyres. It was a day of grim goodbyes. Tyrion Lannister arrived that afternoon, having made a harrowing journey up the King's Road with a small retinue. He was greeted with surprise, and not all looked kindly on him, but Ned met him in the yard anyway, recalling that Tyrion had been among the Lannisters least hostile to the North's plight. Snow clung to the dwarf's boots, and he wore a thick sable cloak lined with fur, an odd contrast to the southern silks Ned remembered. Tyrion's face was set in a serious grimace as he surveyed the damage to Castle Black. "Lord Stark," Tyrion greeted, inclining his head. "You look well, considering how close you once came to, well, losing that head of yours." Ned's mouth twitched. "Life's path has proved unpredictable, Lannister." Tyrion's breath fogged in the cold air. "Unpredictable is one word for it. I've encountered monstrous wights along the road, heard rumors of the others from men fleeing south. King Joffrey, in his infinite wisdom, dispatched me here to confirm the threat, though I suspect he hoped I might not return. Still, if half the rumors are true, the realm stands on the brink of a darkness it has not faced in millennia." "They're all true," Ned replied. "Worse than you can imagine. We barely survived an assault last night, and the White Walkers withdrew only because Daenerys's dragons arrived and Stannis assaulted them from the flank. Otherwise, you'd be stepping over my corpse." Tyrion's eyes flicked with genuine alarm. "So it's as bad as that? And yet we remain fractured, with kings still warring across the south." "We do," Ned said softly. "But for now at least, we have Daenerys Targaryen, Stannis Baratheon, the Night's Watch, the Wildlings, and the North working in concert. It's not everything, but it's a start." Tyrion nodded, running a gloved hand through his blonde hair. "I suppose that means we'll add House Lannister to the list, if I can convince my charming nephew that the realm's survival trumps his pride. I'll do what I can." He glanced toward the smoldering remains of Viserion's pyre, then turned back to Ned with a quiet gravity. "I hope it will be enough." So the days passed in a flurry of preparation. The battered gates were temporarily reinforced with timbers from the forest south of the wall. Men hammered and sawed, grimly aware that it might not hold if the others launched another massive assault. More crows arrived from the south, bearing uncertain tidings. The Reach was in some turmoil, with Mace Tyrell seemingly content to remain in Highgarden, uncertain if he should commit his vast armies north. The Iron Islands had erupted in rebellion yet again, making trouble along the western coasts. King Joffrey had refused to leave King's Landing, dispatching only a paltry force under command of a resentful Kevan Lannister. Word of Renly Baratheon's demise had left the Stormlands in disarray, with some lords bending the knee to Stannis, others uncertain. All in all, the realm was as divided as Ned had feared. But fresh hope also came. A contingent from White Harbor arrived, led by the Manderly men. They had marched straight up the King's Road in the knowledge that the North needed every sword. Ned greeted their lord with gratitude, clasping hands in the shadow of Castle Black's battered walls. Every new arrival, every war horn that sounded in the southern distance might bring the difference between life and death. The combined host now numbered in the many thousands, though a portion remained wounded and the winter cold ate at them day by day. Ned himself saw to the training of men in the usage of dragoglass weapons, teaching them to line their blades or arrowheads with obsidian. He worked with them in the yard, ignoring the ache in his own bones, teaching them to fight in tight formation so they might not be isolated by the whites. He saw to the distribution of furs, cloaks, gloves, because more than once men had lost fingers to frostbite in the freezing nights. In a time like this, leadership meant more than commanding on a battlefield. It meant ensuring your men had boots and bread. More shipments of grain arrived from the Umbers, from the Karstarks. The meager stocks of the Night's Watch were bolstered by crates carted from Winterfell and beyond. Sometimes Ned marveled that this was all truly happening, that the North had become the front line for the entire world against a foe out of legend. But he never let that wonder distract him from the immediate tasks at hand. Finally, the day arrived to begin the offensive to the Fist of the First Men. The host gathered in the courtyard, the breath of countless men steaming in the cold air. Horses stamped nervously. their nostrils flaring. Northerners, wildlings, Baratheon knights, and Targaryen soldiers all prepared to march side by side. Ned stood in the front, dressed in thick furs over his mail. He looked behind him at the assembled throng, feeling a surge of determination. At his side was the great Jon, brandishing a two-handed sword, eager for a real fight. Nearby stood Stannis, a severe glint in his eyes, ready to take advantage of the open terrain, so he could face the others as an enemy like any other. Daenerys was not on foot. She would fly mounted on Drogon. Rhaegal was left behind with Jon, to defend Castle Black, a compromise neither side liked but both deemed necessary. A hush fell as Daenerys approached, her boots crunching in the snow. Her face was drawn but resolved. "Lord Stark," she said quietly, "I'm trusting your sense of strategy in sending me and Drogon to scout ahead. If the White Walkers mass again, I can rain fire upon them. But once they see Drogon, they may try the same spear tactic." Ned met her gaze. "I know. Be cautious, your grace." She inclined her head and strode away, her small retinue of Dothraki and Unsullied in her wake. Moments later, the piercing cry of a dragon echoed across the sky. Drogon's vast wings beat at the air, kicking up swirling flurries of snow. Men stared in awe or cowered from the wind of his ascent. Daenerys climbed up the harness, clinging with practiced skill. Then, with a roar, Drogon heaved himself aloft, the thunder of his wings resounding off the wall's icy face. Every heart pounded at the reminder that they held, in their alliance, a weapon as powerful as living flame. Stannis turned to Ned. "Let's not keep the queen waiting. Form the ranks." The great Jon bellowed at the gathered men, and the columns began to march. Tormund and his wildlings took the vanguard, their knowledge of the terrain crucial. Baratheon knights followed, leading packs of horses loaded with supplies. Northern foot solders carried spears lined with dragonglass, while archers hefted quivers stuffed with obsidian-tipped arrows. A handful of watchers atop the wall waved a solemn farewell, including Jon Snow. Ned lifted a hand in answer, then focused forward. The gates groaned open, letting them pass from the relative safety of Castle Black into the wide, frozen wilderness. Beyond the wall, the land sloped into a patchwork of stunted woods and icy fields. Thin pines rattled in the wind, their branches heavy with clumps of snow. The path was rough, not a proper road, so the men trudged carefully, wary of hidden crevasses. The temperature dropped even further, an iciness that cut to the bone. Frost crystals formed on beards and eyelashes. Daylight seemed muted under a heavy sky. They pressed on. Every so often, Drogon's shadow swept overhead, or they heard his distant roar. Daenerys scouted from above, searching for signs of the White Walkers. If she spotted something, she would circle back, but hour after hour passed without any sightings. This was more unsettling than reassuring, for no one believed the others would simply vanish. They made camp at dusk, forging a rough circle in the lee of a craggy ridge. Fires were lit, the precious wood rationed carefully. Men huddled near the flames, thankful for even a little warmth. The Grey Jon walked among them, telling loud stories of past hunts and battles. Stannis conversed quietly with his knights, planning out the next day's march. Ned shared hard bread and salt beef with Tormund, who regaled him with tales of giant legends in the far north. Even with Tormund's boisterous humor, the mood remained tense. Daenerys landed Drogon near the camp, flattening a line of spindly trees in the process. When she dismounted, her cheeks were raw from the wind. "I saw no sign of them," she reported, voice shaking with cold. "Just endless whiteness, scattered ruins of free folk camps, and tracks that might have been whites or wolves, hard to say. Drogon is growing restless." Ned nodded, offering her a skin of warmed ale. "At least we weren't attacked on the march. But the longer we go without seeing them, the more I worry." She sipped the ale, grimacing at its bitterness. "They may be circling around, waiting for the right moment. Or they're leading us somewhere." "They're cunning," Ned agreed. "We have to assume they want to isolate us, pick us off. But we can't hide behind the wall forever." He gazed over at the line of tents, seeing men retire for the evening. "Let them rest. Tomorrow we move early." Daenerys glanced at Drogon, who settled down into the snow, his black scales reflecting the firelight. In that moment, Ned saw the deep sadness in her expression. She had lost Viserion so recently. It would be a wound that never fully healed. The bond between dragon and rider, though Ned did not understand it, was clearly profound. She parted from him with a brief nod, moving away to see to her own encampment, and Ned was left in the hush of the winter night. He found a place by one of the meager fires, shared with a few men from House Mormont and some Baratheon foot soldiers. They greeted him politely, offering what little space they could for him to stretch out. He ate quietly, forcing down salted fish that tasted of old brine. He needed strength, but he had no appetite. He gazed at the dancing flames, thinking of Sansa, Arya, praying Arya was alive somewhere. Bran, Rickon, Catelyn, all huddled safely behind Winterfell's walls. He hoped Robb was guiding the North well in his absence. The memory of near death in King's Landing came roaring back sometimes, an echo of the horrors he had escaped. How had he gone from that southern fiasco to this place, forging alliances with exiled queens and claiming ancient ring forts in the wilderness? He dozed fitfully, his dreams jumbled with visions of old godswood trees and ice-eyed wights. In one dream, he stood before the crypts of Winterfell, hearing the voices of the dead Starks whispering that he must hold the line, that the fate of the realm depended on it. Then he dreamed of a monstrous swirl of snow in which he glimpsed an armored figure with a crown of horns, impossibly tall, with eyes that glowed a deep, chilling blue. The figure reached out a hand, and Ned felt his heart freeze in dread. He jerked awake, sweat soaking his collar, the night around him silent except for the muffled shifts of men trying to sleep. Drawing a shuddering breath, he stilled himself, reminding himself that it was only a dream. Then he closed his eyes again, longing for dawn to come. They marched for 3 more days. The land became increasingly barren, the wind sharper. Snowdrifts rose to chest height in some places, forcing them to skirt ridges and small ravines. More than once, they passed old free-folk settlements, half-buried huts, battered watchtowers made of logs and raw stone. Tormund recognized some of them from years past, shaking his head at how empty they now stood. They found no living souls, only the occasional corpse frozen in the snow, some fresh, some half-eaten by scavengers. Daenerys continued her aerial scouting, returning each dusk with little to report aside from glimpses of trodden paths. A quiet fear coiled in every man's belly. The White Walkers were out there, lurking. The sheer scale of the Northlands beyond the wall made it easy for an entire army to hide, especially an army that did not need rest or food. Late on the 4th day, they finally reached the foothills near the Fist of the First Men, a stony plateau rising above the surrounding forested slopes. The men beheld the ring fort, a worn circle of old stones perched atop the crest, and found it empty. They approached warily, sending scouts ahead. The fort's ancient walls rose only a few feet in places, having long crumbled, but the vantage point was excellent, overlooking the region in every direction. At the center stood remnants of an even older structure, likely from the Age of Heroes, though it was so weathered by time that none could guess its original shape. They circled the ring of stones, picking paths among the boulders. No sign of wights, no sign of living foes. An uneasy relief spread among them as they realized they had arrived without immediate attack. Stannis was grimly satisfied. "We'll fortify these walls. If the others want to challenge us here, they can come and burn." They set about building a camp, layering stones to create higher barricades, digging trenches around the perimeter. Daenerys circled overhead with Drogon, scouting farther out. Meanwhile, Ned helped coordinate the layout of tents and supply caches. The Greatjon ordered men to gather as much firewood as possible from the sparse pines. Tormund sent a few wildlings to check hidden caches from old free-folk stashes, hoping to find anything useful. A hush of anticipation lay over them all. It felt like they were perched in a bear's den waiting for the beast to return. That night, they built fires along the ring fort's perimeter. Archers and spearmen kept watch in shifts. Ned forced himself to rest for a few hours, but fear gnawed at the back of his mind. When he rose near midnight, he walked the perimeter. Snow crunched beneath his boots and the wind hissed through the pines below. He paused at a vantage point to gaze out over the moonlit valley. A near-full moon offered decent visibility, but all he saw was an expanse of white slopes and twisting clusters of trees. His eyes darted from shadow to shadow, seeking movement. His breath curled in silver clouds. Where are they? A noise behind him made him turn. Daenerys stood there, cloaked in furs, her expression pale. "I dreamed of them," she said softly, stepping up to the low wall. "The White Walkers. I saw them marching under the moon, an endless horde. Does that sound foolish?" Ned shook his head. These days, we all dream of them. Because we know they are coming. She peered out at the valley. I fear for my dragons. Drogon is strong and fierce, but the Night King, he killed Viserion so quickly and I couldn't stop him. It makes me feel powerless. Ned's face softened. He wields a dark magic older than any of us. None of us are truly safe from it. All we can do is stand against him. For if we don't, there'll be no realm left to protect. She nodded, eyes shining with an inner fire. I will make them pay for Viserion, for all the living they've killed. Ned studied her, seeing how the death of one of her dragons had changed her. There was a steel in her that was frightening, but he sensed she meant to channel it against the true enemy. He placed a hand on the crumbling stones, shifting the conversation. We must rely on each other's strengths. Your dragons, Stannis' discipline, the North's knowledge of winter. If we stand alone, we fall. So I'm glad you're here. The realm is stronger for it. Her lips curved into a faint, haunted smile. Then let us hope the realm lasts long enough to repay your trust. With that, they parted, returning to their respective watchpoints. The night passed uneventfully, as did the next day. Men trained within the ring fort, practicing with spears, arrows, and swords. Daenerys flew several scouting passes. Stannis sent out roving patrols with Tormund's wildlings. Each patrol returned with stories of eerie silence or old tracks, but no direct contact with the enemy. The tension wound tighter with each empty hour. On the second night, everything changed. The watchers at the southwestern edge of the ring fort began shouting just after sunset. Horns blew, a single, two, then three long blasts that everyone knew signaled White Walkers. Ned raced to the western wall, sword in hand, heart pounding. The Greatjon was already there, gripping the hilt of his great sword. Men crowded the parapet of stones, craning to see into the gathering darkness. Flames from the perimeter fires illuminated the snow some 50 yards out, and beyond that, shapes. At first, only a few wights staggered into view, half-rotted corpses in ragged furs. Then more. And more. They came from the tree line like a living avalanche of death, stumbling and crawling over one another. Behind them, the looming figures of White Walkers appeared, tall and lean, armor glinting with a faint bluish sheen in the moonlight. The watchers cursed under their breath. It was an army the size of which they had not yet faced, thousands of wights packed in a slow but relentless wave, flanked by more White Walkers than Ned had ever imagined. And as the horns faded, a deeper, more terrifying note seemed to echo across the valley, the hollow call of the dead. Stannis arrived in a rush of stomping feet, shouting for archers. Daenerys, who had been at the ring fort's center, scrambled to mount Drogon, aided by Ser Jorah. The men seized spears with obsidian tips while archers knocked obsidian-tipped arrows. Tormund bared his teeth, gripping an axe in one hand, a dragonglass dagger in the other. Squires ran from man to man, lighting torches and brand bundles. The glow of the fires made the swirling snow orange. Ned swallowed, forcing himself to remain calm. Archers loosed the first volley of arrows. A hiss of shafts cut through the air, many glowing from the pitch set aflame. They struck the front rank of wights with dull, wet thuds, setting them ablaze. Dozens fell, but dozens more lurched forward. Another volley soared into the gloom. Screams and howls echoed. Ned watched the White Walkers behind the White Horde, their blue eyes shining, their presence stirring the dead on with unnatural force. Drogon launched from the ring fort with a thunderous roar, Daenerys clinging to his back. He swooped low, unleashing a torrent of flame that cut a blazing swath through the white ranks. Bodies ignited in seconds, shriveling into blackened husks. Men on the walls cheered, in exultation that quickly died as they saw how vast the enemy numbers remained. The White Walkers spread out as if anticipating the dragon's pass. Some raised ice lances. Ned's heart clenched. Pull back, Daenerys, he muttered under his breath, though she could not hear. She climbed higher, Drogon beating his wings furiously, attempting to stay out of range. Still, a spear of ice arced upward, missing Drogon by mere yards. The dragon roared in rage, circling for another pass. Meanwhile, the first wave of wights crashed into the trenches that Stannis' men had dug. Fire traps were ignited, sending flames bursting into the front lines of undead. But still they came, piling over their own burning dead, inhuman in their relentlessness. The defenders met them with spears and swords once they reached the ring of stones. The Greatjon roared with savage joy, hacking at wights that climbed the slope. For the north, he bellowed. A wight latched onto his cloak only to have its skull split by his backswing. Stannis, for his part, led a group of knights in a disciplined shield wall, stabbing forward with obsidian-tipped spears. Another knot of whites overcame a section of Baratheon foot soldiers, forcing them to fall back behind the ring's partial stone barrier. The undead pressed again, shrieking in silent, hateful unison. Ned joined a formation near the southwestern arc, ice in his hands. The blade had its own storied heritage, Valyrian steel hammered in ancient times. He had used it against a White Walker once before, near Castle Black, and it had shattered the creature into shards of ice. Now whites surged at them like a living tide. Ned's men formed a line, bristling with spears. As the whites leapt over the low stones, Ned swung, severing an arm and then a head. Another slash took a white in the torso, splitting it in half. Yet for each one that fell, another clambered forward. The men fought with a fierce determination, but the dead kept coming. Flashes of dragonfire tore across the battlefield. Charred corpses slumped in piles. The wind picked up, carrying sparks high into the darkness. In the distance, Ned caught sight of a figure on a pale horse perched upon a ridge of ice, watching the battle. The silhouette of the Night King. His horned crown and tall, thin shape were unmistakable. Even from so far away, Ned felt the chill of that malevolent stare. Another blast of flame from Drogon forced the White Walkers below to scatter, but the Night King did not budge, observing the carnage as though all of it were a grim game. A wildling horn sounded from the eastern slope, followed by cries. Tormund had discovered a second wave of undead converging from that side, threatening to encircle the ring fort. Men scrambled to redeploy. Daenerys tried to split her efforts, blasting the eastern flank, but the White Walkers were cunning. They hurled more ice spears, and though Drogon dodged with surprising agility, the risk was dire. Meanwhile, the defenders in the west were hard-pressed. The ring fort was too large to be manned by a single tight circle, forcing them to spread their forces thin. Ned felt sweat freezing on his brow as he cleaved another white. A soldier beside him went down, tackled by a swarm of undead, his screams abruptly cut off. The line wavered. The Greyjohn rallied them with roars, hacking, and kicking. Stannis pressed from another angle, trying to keep the whites from flooding the center. Arrows rained from the back ranks, though some found living flesh instead of dead in the swirling chaos. The night was a tumult of shrieks, clangs, shouts, and the roar of flames. For a moment, Ned thought they might be overrun. The wave was simply too large, too relentless. Then the night sky erupted with a new sound, the bellow of a horn from overhead. Ned risked a glance upward. Another dragon soared into view from the south, regal, with Jon Snow astride, flanked by a handful of watchers from Castle Black who clung to harness straps. Relief and fear warred in Ned's chest. Jon had come, despite instructions to remain behind. But that meant more dragonfire for the battlefield. Regal swooped down, unleashing searing flames on the eastern flank. The whites screeched, blackened, collapsed. For a heartbeat, the entire slope was alight. Thrashing corpses tumbling down the hillside. Daenerys turned Drogon, and together the two dragons battered the undead with gouts of flame, forcing them to pull back from the ring fort in pockets. The arrival of a second dragon also appeared to draw the ire of the White Walkers. Ned saw their tall figures cluster, raising shards of ice. Several spears whistled through the air. One nearly struck Regal in the wing, but Jon maneuvered away just in time, the spear burying itself into the slope behind them. Across the ring fort, men cheered or cried out, emboldened by the sudden shift in momentum. Ned pushed forward with his small group, hacking down the whites nearest him, dragging a wounded comrade to safety. His arms screamed with fatigue, but he could not let up. Stannis' knights followed suit, methodically crushing skulls and severing limbs. The Great Jon, soaked in gore, swung his sword in wide arcs that scattered bones and frozen viscera. Near the center, Daenerys landed Drogon momentarily to let Ser Jorah and a group of Unsullied dismount, forming a disciplined phalanx that advanced behind tall spears, driving the whites back. In the flickering glow of the fires, the White Walkers themselves began to engage. One broke from the line, crossing the ring fort perimeter in a flurry of supernatural speed. Its sword of ice slammed into the spears of a half-dozen men, shattering them with chilling ease. Bodies flew as it cut them down. Ned and Stannis rushed to intercept it, Ned's Valyrian steel shining with an unearthly gleam. Stannis wielded a sword rumored to be Lightbringer, though whether it truly was or not, Ned could not say. Together they flanked the walker. The creature hissed, raising its blade. Stannis lunged, the blade scraping along the walker's armor, leaving a fracture of frost. Ned followed with a swift cut to the being's back, slicing through its icy shell. It let out a shriek that stabbed at their ears before disintegrating into shards that shimmered on the ground. One White Walker down, but more advanced, each commanding clusters of whites to swarm the defenses. On the eastern edge, Regal's fire had forced a partial retreat, but the enemy regrouped. The battle churned into a savage standstill. Dead men burned, living men died. Blood and ice slicked the ground. Then the night grew colder, as though the temperature plummeted in an instant. Every breath came out in a thick cloud. A hush of dread rippled across the battlefield. Even the swirling snow seemed to freeze in midair. The Night King was moving. Ned caught a glimpse of him descending the ridge, flanked by half a dozen White Walkers. Their presence alone brought a heavier weight of cold, as if they carried the heart of winter within them. Above, Drogon and Regal circled, preparing a combined blast of dragon fire. Daenerys and Jon must have seen the Night King approach. With roars, the two dragons swooped low, unleashing twin torrents of flame that converged on the figures below. An inferno swallowed that section of the ridge, fire dancing wildly. Men cried out in triumph, yet Ned felt a stab of doubt. He remembered how the White Walkers recoiled from flame, but the Night King had shown the ability to withstand ordinary fire. The question was whether dragon fire would be enough. For a moment it looked as though the entire group of White Walkers had been consumed. The air boiled. But as the flames died, there stood the Night King, unscathed, his tall silhouette etched against the blackened snow. The lesser walkers had melted away or fallen back, but he remained. He lifted a hand, and from the surrounding field of corpses, both whites and the newly dead men, dozens began to stir once more. With an agonizing slowness, these bodies lurched upright, their eyes shining with the same blue glow. A collective moan of despair rose from the defenders. Men found themselves facing their own fallen comrades, forced to fight them anew. Ned's heart sank. He locked eyes with Stannis. The man's face was set in grim fury, but Ned could see the flicker of uncertainty. The Night King could raise the dead with a mere gesture. They could burn the bodies as quickly as they liked, but in the chaos of battle, every fallen soldier risked returning as an enemy. Already the tide was turning again. Drogon and Regal roared from above, furious that their fire had failed to kill the Night King. They swooped for another pass, but the Night King's hand began to form a spear of crystallized ice. Ned shouted wordlessly, though there was no chance Daenerys or Jon could hear him. The Night King hurled the spear with inhuman strength. It hurtled through the air, aimed at Regal's flank. Jon wrenched the dragon aside at the last moment, and the spear clipped Regal's wing, shredding membrane. The dragon bellowed, listing in the sky as he lost altitude. Jon clung desperately, guiding Regal toward a rough landing along the ringfort's perimeter. Another spear formed in the Night King's hand, quick as an afterthought. Drogon dived to distract him. Daenerys guided her mount in a savage swirl of flame, but the Night King vanished into the swirl of white, his figure lost among the rank of whites. The ground forces were left to fend for themselves as a horde of newly risen corpses hammered their lines. Stannis barked for men to form a fallback position near the ringfort's center. Tormund fought to hold the eastern side, but was rapidly being overwhelmed. The Great Jon refused to retreat at first until Ned himself grabbed his arm and insisted, or they would be cut off from the main force. They pulled back slowly, each step contested by snapping jaws and clutching hands. Valyrian steel or dragonglass strikes put the undead down, but fresh horrors replaced them. Carts full of dragonglass projectiles had been toppled in the chaos, and men scrabbled to recover arrowheads while fending off the dead. Screams echoed. The ringfort's once sturdy perimeter was now a battleground of swirling smoke and flame. Overhead, Regal rested on the ground, snarling in pain, while a few brave men tried to protect Jon and the wounded dragon from swarms of whites. Drogon soared above, launching spurts of flame, but each time Daenerys risked flying low, a volley of ice spears threatened to end them both. At last, Ned, Stannis, Tormund, and the Great Jon established a rough circle near the center, ringed by tall stones that offered partial cover. Unsullied phalanxes joined them, as did Baratheon knights and northern axemen, forming a battered circle of shields. The whites rushed them from all sides, while White Walkers loomed behind the front lines, controlling the tide. Another pass of Drogon's fire gave them a moment's respite. Ned's arms ached from endless cutting. Stannis was breathing raggedly, a gash above his eye. Tormund bled from his leg. The Greyjohn's left arm hung limp. Yet they held. Daenerys tried to land Drogon near the circle, perhaps to coordinate a last stand. But as she descended, an ice spear whipped from the side, cast by a White Walker that had flanked them. Drogon twisted away in midair, snapping his jaws. The spear missed by inches. Daenerys clung to the reins, her face stark with fear. It was a matter of time before luck ran out. Ned scanned the chaos, searching for the Night King. If that monstrous being fell, perhaps the whites would collapse. But the swirl of bodies and snow made it impossible to see. He only glimpsed pale figures in the gloom. Shouts rose from the eastern side. Through the swirling melee, Ned saw a large host forging its way up the slopes, brandishing torches and banners. For an instant, he braced for more undead. But then he recognized the sign of the flayed man, House Bolton. Alongside them rode men bearing the wolfshed of House Stark. A second wave of cavalry thundered in, Northman reinforcements led by Roose Bolton, who had apparently left the Dreadfort with every man he could muster, possibly in response to messages from Winterfell or from the Watch. With them came other lords from the CK and the eastern north who had decided at long last to ride beyond the wall. Their torches lit up the slope in flickering orange lines. The whites turned to meet this new threat, but the cavalry smashed through their flank, sabers and spears glinting with obsidian edges. Men on foot followed, hacking at the undead from behind. Cheers erupted among the defenders in the ringfort. The whites found themselves caught between the ringfort's circle and the fresh assault from behind. With a renewed roar, Stannis ordered a charge. Tormund led a savage push on the eastern side. Ned threw himself forward, cutting through two whites. The circle expanded as the living hammered the dead from both sides. Overhead, Drogon and Regal spat jets of flame, sealing the advantage. A new impetus seized them, the possibility of survival. A White Walker strode forward to intercept the cavalry, slicing down a half-dozen riders with its ice blade, but a tall figure in the thick of the Bolton ranks. A man wearing the sigil of the Dreadfort lunged with a spear whose tip gleamed with dragoglass. The White Walker parried once, but a second thrust pierced its torso. It shrieked, dissolving into shards. Another White Walker tried to rally the whites to block the cavalry, but the swirl of chaos fractured their formations. At the center, the Night King at last became visible, his tall form stepping calmly over the carnage. Even with the tide turning, he appeared unhurried, as though assured of eventual triumph. Regal snarled and tried to launch skyward again, but his wounded wing prevented more than a short hop. Jon slid from the saddle, brandishing Longclaw, which glinted with its Valyrian steel. He made to charge the Night King, but the creature raised a hand. Nearby corpses twitched and lurched up. Jon found himself surrounded by whites in an instant, forced to fight tooth and nail, unable to reach the Night King. Then Daenerys swept overhead on Drogon, unleashing a mighty roar of flame that crashed down around the Night King. Ned held his breath. The avalanche of heat swallowed that entire section of ground. The snow melted to slush, steam rising in great billows. This time, the Night King lifted both arms, forming a barrier of shimmering ice that parted the flames around him. But as he focused on defending himself, Ned saw a figure in the swirling steam, Stannis Baratheon, sword lifted. The king had circled behind, braving the scalding steam and mud. With a swift motion, Stannis thrust his blade at the Night King's unguarded back. The blow never connected. The Night King turned with inhuman speed, slamming an ice-encrusted fist into Stannis' chest, knocking him off his feet. Stannis landed hard, sword clattering from his grip. Another second, and the Night King raised his foot to crush Stannis' skull. Ned let out a cry, surging forward through the mud and half-melted snow. He swung ice with every ounce of strength. The blade bit deep into the Night King's flank, sending a burst of frost crystals into the air. A hideous screech tore from that pale throat. Ned felt an icy shock run up his arms as though he'd plunged them into freezing water. The Night King staggered, turning his terrible gaze upon Ned. Time seemed to slow. Those eyes were colder than the void between stars, ancient and unforgiving. Ned recalled the dream in which he had seen that same figure. He gritted his teeth, trying to wrench ice free for another strike. The Night King's hand shot up, gripping the blade, frost racing along the metal. The two of them stood locked for a heartbeat, Ned's arms trembling. The cold was excruciating. But then the great Jon, howling like a mad beast, crashed into the Night King from the side, a massive dragoglass axe in his hands. He swung. The black blade connected with the Night King's shoulder, fracturing a patch of ice that sealed his upper arm. Another screech split the air, and the Night King thrust both Ned and the great Jon away with a wave of chilling force. They flew backward, landing hard. Ned's ears rang. He heard men shouting. He saw the great Jon rolling to his knees. The Night King had been wounded, cracks of ice shimmering along his torso. Yet he was not destroyed. Ned groaned, trying to push himself upright, half blind from pain. The Night King stood in the churned mud, raising his arms as though summoning the power of the bitter wind itself. Snow and hail whirled around him, forming a swirling white wall. Behind the veil, Ned saw the faint outline of his horned crown turning away. With a final, unearthly howl, the creature vanished, the whiteness collapsing in on itself. It was as if the storm devoured him, carrying him off into the night. The whites around them faltered, some collapsing in place, others staggering aimlessly. The White Walkers retreated, half disappearing in that same swirl of snow. When the wind died, the slope was left strewn with dead, human and white alike. The men and women of the living stood blinking at the sudden stillness. A ragged cheer started somewhere, caught up by others who realized the army of the dead had withdrawn or disintegrated. Once more, the others had been beaten back but not destroyed. The living had survived yet another night, but at terrible cost. Ned pushed himself to his feet, leaning heavily on ice. The blade had a thin layer of frost upon it. He felt as if he'd held onto a chunk of pure ice for hours. Stannis lay a few yards away, moaning weakly, clutching his chest. The Great Jon assisted Ned in reaching him. The blow had cracked some of Stannis's armor, but he was alive, battered and shivering. Men rushed over, offering help. Ned turned, scanning the battlefield. Bodies everywhere, steaming in the frigid air. He saw Tormund resting on a broken rock, blood streaming from cuts on his arms. He saw Daenerys Landrogon, her face filled with worry and relief. Off to the side, Jon knelt beside Regal, who panted in pain but was alive. The bolstered forces from the Bolton cavalry were spread out across the slope, now gathering at the ring fort to tend wounds and burn corpses. Night gave way to a feeble dawn, painting the sky with gray and pale pink. The ring fort stank of blood and charred flesh. Yet they had won a significant victory, driving back the largest White Walker assault they had faced. The men were in awe. Some knelt at the sight of the dragons, some praised Stannis, some praised Daenerys, some wept openly for the loss of friends and kin. Ned walked among them, grimly reminding them to gather the corpses of the whites for burning, to search for survivors, to tend the wounded. Everyone was thoroughly spent, stumbling through the tasks as best they could. Hours later, they set pyres for the dead once more. The stench of smoke permeated everything. Ned found a place to sit and rest his aching limbs, letting a maester see to the frostbite on his forearms. He tried to reflect on the night's events. They had forced the Night King to withdraw, though at no small cost. But the deeper truth was that the others could retreat at will, picking the time and place of each engagement. Even when faced with 2 dragons and thousands of men, the White Walkers had nearly triumphed. That fact weighed heavily on Ned's heart. Daenerys appeared, kneeling beside him. She looked as tired as he felt, though relief glimmered in her eyes. "We drove him away," she said softly, a statement tinged with half-disbelief. Ned gave a tight nod. "Yes. For now." She studied him. "You wounded him, you and the Great Jon. Perhaps next time." Ned sighed, rubbing a hand over his tired face. "We keep saying next time, next time. We might not have enough men left for a next time if these battles continue." She pursed her lips. "Then we must end it soon. We must find a way to destroy him, not just wound him." He let out a slow breath. "The legends say that the Night King was once a man. If that's true, there must be a way to kill him. The children of the forest created the White Walkers with some cursed magic involving dragonglass. Perhaps only an equal magic or certain relic can end them. But I have no certain answer." She set her jaw. "We'll seek those answers, whatever the cost." A commotion interrupted them. Ned turned to see Jon Snow approaching, limping slightly, though more from exhaustion than injury. He bowed his head briefly. "Father, we've got the wounded settled. Regal will recover, I think, but he'll need time before he can fly again. Too many holes in his wing." Ned rose and embraced Jon, ignoring the flare of pain in his arms. "You came at great risk. You disobeyed my instructions." Jon stiffened, then exhaled. "I couldn't sit at Castle Black while we had 2 dragons. The watch was safe enough with the men we left behind. I had to help, and it looks like it was needed." Ned couldn't bring himself to rebuke Jon. Instead, he nodded. "You saved us from being overrun." Behind Jon, the Great Jon arrived, battered and grinning through his blood-stained beard. "We gave the cold bastard a proper taste, oh Northern Steel, my lord? Next time, we'll split him in 2. Ned didn't share the Great Jon's reckless optimism, but he nodded. "Aye. Next time." He turned to Daenerys. "We'll have to decide our next move. If the others retreat deeper into the north, do we chase them again? How many times can we do this?" Before she could answer, Stannis Baratheon was helped over by 2 knights. His face was pale, but his eyes still burned with intensity. "We keep fighting," he rasped, wincing as the maester probed his ribs. We push them back to the lands of always winter if we must and corner the Night King. Better to die trying than wait for him to gather more corpses. Daenerys frowned, though not in disagreement. We need more alliances. More men. This was the largest force we could muster on such short notice. We have to rally the entire realm or we won't endure. Even with dragons, the cost in lives is too high. Stannis glowered. We should drag that boy King Joffrey from his nest and force him to see reason. And the Tyrells, where are they? Hiding in their green fields while we freeze to death. Ned sighed. We will send more ravens, more pleas, more threats if need be. No one in the south is safe if the Night King breaks through us. They must understand that. In the meantime, we can fortify. Perhaps we can locate any ancient lore about how the first men ended the long night before. Stannis' voice was ragged. I recall tales that Azor Ahai will be reborn to wield Lightbringer and end the darkness. Some say I am Azor Ahai. Some say Daenerys is. Others claim differently. He let out a bitter breath. I care not about prophecies. I only care that we stand together. Daenerys hesitated, glancing at the sword he had dropped in the mud. Perhaps the sword does not matter as much as our unity, as you say. But if there is power in old magic, we may need it yet. They subsided into silence, watching the columns of smoke rise from the burning heaps. Once again, they had survived. Yet the war was far from over. The living were bloodied and weary, and each victory came at a greater cost. The White Walkers could afford to lose countless whites. The living could not afford to lose thousands more men. Ned felt the weight of it pressing down. But as he gazed around the ring fort, seeing Baratheon knights clasp hands with wildling warriors, watching Northmen bow respectfully to unsullied guards, seeing Jon stand beside Daenerys and Stannis with unspoken camaraderie, he recognized that unity was growing stronger. At least they were forging bonds in this inferno, forging an alliance that might prove unbreakable. A day later, ravens flew again, carrying urgent messages throughout Westeros. The Night King has been sighted. The others march. We have held them at the fist of the first men but require aid to achieve final victory. Rally to the wall or be consumed by the dead. So Ned pleaded, so Stannis demanded, so Daenerys asked. The ravens sped south, where lords and ladies would either heed or ignore the call. Time would tell. In the battered ring fort, repairs continued. They built more walls with stone and earth. Pikes lined with dragonglass were driven into the ground in wide arcs. Rhaegal rested, his wing carefully bound by the efforts of maesters and a few wise wildlings who claimed knowledge of beasts. Drogon prowled overhead, occasionally spitting short bursts of flame to ward off stray whites that ventured too close. The nights remained perilous, with watchers on every perimeter, but the dead did not launch another full-scale assault. Sporadic skirmishes erupted here or there, White Walkers testing their defenses before vanishing. In these tense days, Ned took counsel with Daenerys, Stannis, Tormund, and the Great Jon, deciding how long they could hold the fist. Some argued they should return to Castle Black or even Winterfell, forcing the others to come deeper into the realm where reinforcements might be easier to gather. Others insisted that ceding ground would only concede an advantage to the Night King. They debated late into the evenings, sometimes turning heated. Meanwhile, the men stood vigilant and roving patrols scoured the forests for hidden pockets of whites. On the 5th day after the battle, a horn sounded from the southern approach. Shouts carried up the slope. Another host was arriving. Ned hurried to the ring fort's edge, peering down to see a large group of riders and foot soldiers bearing multiple banners. To his surprise, the Golden Rose of House Tyrell led the procession, joined by various smaller banners from the Reach. They were accompanied by the sigil of House Tarly, the Huntsman, and that of House Redwine. Alongside them rode knights with no sigils at all and a few who wore the banner of the Faith Militant, a disquieting sign that the High Sparrow's influence had penetrated even here. But for all that, these were living men, thousands strong, braving the winter road north. Ned allowed himself a moment of genuine relief. Leading them was Ser Brienne of Tarth, her armor marked with the sigil of House Tyrell in a place of prominence. She led the vanguard, flanked by tall men in green cloaks. Behind them, a stout figure on a massive charger wore the ornate filigree of the Tyrells. As they neared the ring fort, Ser Brienne called out, "Lord Stark. We come from Highgarden to answer the realm's need." Ned descended with a handful of men to greet them. He recognized the stout figure as Lord Randall Tarly, not Mace Tyrell. Tarly was known for his discipline and ferocity. Ser Brienne dismounted smoothly. She looked tired and travel-worn. Ned bowed respectfully. "Ser Brienne. Lord Tarly. We're grateful for your arrival. You traveled far? Tarly nodded curtly. Longer than we would have liked. Highgarden was in chaos after so many rumors. But when news arrived that the Night King threatened the entire realm, I assembled what men I could and rode north. Lady Brienne here was instrumental in persuading the Tyrell bannermen to join us in the absence of Mace Tyrell himself. Ned frowned. Lord Mace did not come? Brienne shook her head. He refused to leave Highgarden's comfort. But he allowed me to lead a muster of those who wished to fight. Loras Tyrell remains imprisoned by the Faith, so we took what knights we could. The Faith militant chose to accompany us as well, believing it their holy duty to fight the dead. Ned glanced at the group of starry-cloaked warriors. We won't turn away swords, however they come. But be warned, the fight ahead is like none you've seen. Even last night, the dead came in droves. Tarly nodded, his stern expression unwavering. We are prepared to do our duty. Where would you have us deploy? They led the newcomers inside the ring fort, though space was limited. Tents spilled across the slopes, each pitched on ground still stained from the recent battle. Men of the Reach gazed in horror at the pyres and blackened earth. Some had likely thought the stories exaggerated. Ned watched them, remembering how new recruits at war often carried a stunned look. But if the Tyrell men were cowed, they hid it behind stoic discipline. Tarly's presence had clearly whipped them into shape. Daenerys emerged to greet them, her silver-gold hair stirring in the wind. Many of the Reachmen froze, staring in awe at the living dragon perched above the ring fort. Drogon rumbled, his red eyes flicking across the newcomers. Ser Jorah Mormont stepped forward, offering a cautious greeting. Stannis arrived soon after, wincing from his cracked ribs but determined to maintain an appearance of authority. Tormund lounged on a rocky outcrop, occasionally snorting at the polite southern greetings. Together, they welcomed the new arrivals, ensuring they understood the nature of the battle lines. Tarly was introduced to Stannis, who eyed him with the same stern manner. Both men found something to respect in each other's sense of discipline. Meanwhile, Brienne approached Ned quietly, away from the main bustle. I remember you from Winterfell, Lord Stark. You once showed me kindness when I was merely a young, awkward girl at a feast. I never forgot. Ned inclined his head, though the memory was faint. I'm glad you've come. We need every sword, but also every brave heart. This war is bigger than any house or king. She nodded. I pledged myself to serve honor and justice. Fighting the dead is a cause I never imagined, but here I stand. Ned's face softened. You do your vows credit, Ser Brienne. She glanced at Daenerys and Stannis conferring with Tarly. There's talk of so many kings and queens. Are you loyal to one? Ned hesitated. I am loyal to the realm and to my family. The rest is complicated. Brienne studied him a moment, then gave a respectful nod. Then perhaps we share a purpose. Let us hope we can do some good here. She went off to help organize the Reachmen's camp. Ned exhaled, feeling the exhaustion weigh on him. With the arrivals from the Reach, their combined forces swelled. But the memory of the last battle remained too fresh. Even 10,000 more men might not tip the scales if the Night King marshaled his entire legion of the dead. They needed to slay him at the source. But how? In the days that followed, scouts reported that the others seemed to have withdrawn deeper into the icy wastes, presumably to rebuild their numbers of whites from the scattered dead villages and free folk who might yet roam. Rumors spoke of entire old clans being turned. Ned and his fellow commanders debated whether to launch a fresh offensive or to strengthen their position. The majority favored reinforcing the ring fort while also sending out strong patrols to disrupt the others if possible. Daenerys, Stannis, and Tormund led occasional raids with the dragons, burning out pockets of whites. But the big push did not come. The nights were tense, everyone expecting another assault, but it did not arrive in force. Then a raven arrived from Winterfell, bearing news from Robb Stark and from Catelyn. The Vale had at last stirred. Littlefinger had apparently convinced young Lord Robert Arryn to dispatch a modest host north to assist, though Sansa's letter also suggested Baelish was maneuvering to gain more influence in the Vale. Another letter mentioned that men loyal to the crown in King's Landing had begun to march under Kevan Lannister, albeit grudgingly. All throughout the realm, tardy as it might be, armies were mobilizing. Perhaps, Ned thought with a flicker of hope, the living were at last uniting. Daenerys grew restless, wanting to chase the Night King all the way to the mythical land of always winter. Stannis agreed in principle but remained cautious about dividing their forces too much. They compromised by sending out large war parties on swift raids. Drogon still sword-free and Rhaegal was healing but would need time. Each day, Daenerys launched from the ring fort with 100 men or 200 to scour the region. Each day, a few whites were destroyed but the true mass of the White Walkers eluded them. In the ring fort, rumors flew that the Night King was raising an even larger army, that he had monstrous ice spiders at his command, that he communed with the storms themselves. Others whispered that the cold winds were a sign that the next assault would be the final one. Some said they had glimpsed the ephemeral shapes of the children of the forest in the distant woods, though no one confirmed it. Tormund joked that the others were frightened of the fire-breathing lizard beasts. But behind his laughter, Ned saw the same worry everyone shared. Winter deepened. Snow fell daily, burying the corpses they had yet to burn. Some men succumbed to frostbite or disease. Food stores, though bolstered by the recent arrivals, began to run low. The Northmen were used to hardship, but the Southern Knights suffered. Lord Tarly's men complained quietly while the Faith militant tried to spin the suffering into a test of the gods. Daenerys's Dothraki hated the cold bitterly. The Unsullied, disciplined though they were, needed supplies to keep functioning in the freezing conditions. Ned watched with growing concern, for attrition could defeat them as effectively as an undead onslaught. At last, in the depths of a howling blizzard, scouts returned with ominous news. An enormous horde of whites was advancing from the far north, accompanied by White Walkers in unheard-of numbers. They carried no torches, no banners, only the storm swirling around them. The scouts had lost 2 men just escaping with the tidings. The final confrontation, it seemed, was at hand. Ned called a council of all major commanders in the ring fort's central clearing. Fires guttered in braziers, sputtering from the wind. Snow whipped across the open ground. Daenerys stood near Drogon, who braced himself against the gale. Stannis arrived in his battered armor, a heavy cloak sweeping behind him. Tormund came, flanked by wildlings. Jon appeared, leading a small band of the Watch, while the Great Jon, Lord Tarly, Roose Bolton, and others formed a loose semicircle. They shielded their faces from the stinging snow, eyes narrowed. The scouts say the enemy is 3 days' march away, maybe less, said Stannis. If we try to meet them in the open, we risk being surrounded again. Daenerys folded her arms. But if we remain within these walls, can we withstand their full might? Roose Bolton's voice was cold as ice. We must consider strategic withdrawal to Winterfell, drawing them deeper into the realm. Tormund spat. Cowards talk. Retreat behind your southern walls while the free folk die here? We made a stand and we'll hold it. Ned raised a hand. Calm. We must weigh every choice. If the entire realm were here, I'd say stand and fight. But we're still waiting on more southern hosts. However, retreating now is no small matter. The time it would take to move so many men back across the wall in the midst of a blizzard, we could be caught exposed. And if we fail to break them here, the undead could stream south unchecked. Jon stepped forward. Castle Black might be more defensible if we use the wall's fortifications. But his father says it's a long way back, and we might be overtaken on the road. Daenerys' eyes flicked to Drogon. Rhaegal's wing still isn't fully mended. We might not have his fire. And if the others have truly gathered in such numbers, even Drogon might not be enough. But if we can lure the Night King out, we can try to kill him. Tarly pursed his lips. If he is truly the linchpin, then everything we do must be aimed at drawing him into a trap. Ned looked around at the ring of faces. A trap? Yes. Perhaps we can use the ring fort as bait, forcing the Night King to commit his entire force. Once he's engaged, the dragons strike. If we can isolate him with a line of men wielding Valyrian steel or dragonglass, maybe we can finish him. The Great Jon let out a boisterous laugh. Ha! I'd like to see that icy bastard's face when we bury an axe in it. Bolton's quiet voice interjected, assuming your men don't break at the sight of an endless horde. A trap can become a slaughterhouse if it fails. Stannis' jaw clenched. We have no better plan. We stand here. We do everything in our power to kill the Night King. If we fail, the realm is lost anyway. After a beat, the lords agreed, though worry was etched into every face. They would remain at the fist of the first men, fortifying as best they could. They would stockpile pitch, oil, and wildfire if any was available. They would place men with dragonglass-laden scorpions around the perimeter to strike at the White Walkers from afar if possible. Daenerys would watch from the sky, but only dive when she saw an opening to strike at the Night King himself. If the White Walkers appeared vulnerable, they would risk Rhaegal as well, but only if absolutely necessary. The rest of the men would hold formation no matter how dire it seemed until the trap was sprung. So the fortress bustled with desperate preparations. Wildfire caches from Stannis' old store were carefully placed in strategic spots. Barrels of pitch were rolled to vantage points. Dragonglass mines were fashioned into arrowheads, spear tips, sword edges. Even the faith militant assisted, chanting prayers to the Seven as they labored. The freezing wind battered them day and night. Some men collapsed from exposure, but the morale was guardedly high. At least they had a plan, a final stand that might turn the tide once and for all. The day before the predicted arrival, Jon approached Ned in the pre-dawn gloom. They stood on the outer wall of the ring fort, torches guttering behind them. Jon gazed into the dark. "Father, if we don't make it." Ned raised a hand, gently turning Jon to face him. "We cannot think like that." Jon's gray eyes were solemn. "I can't help it. I've dreamed of this doom since I first joined the Night's Watch. The enemy is almost here. I wanted to tell you thank you. For everything. You've given me a place in your family even though." Ned's gaze flickered. "Stop. You are a Stark, Jon. Always have been. Always will be. We fight side by side now for the realm, for each other." Jon swallowed. "Yes, father. If the chance comes to face the Night King, I'll take it no matter the risk." Ned nodded, though a lump formed in his throat. "Just keep your wits about you." They stood in silence, side by side, until the cold drove them to find shelter again. The final day was spent in watchful tension. The sky remained overcast, the wind howling. Scouts came and went. No sign of the others until late afternoon when horns sounded in the distance. Tormund returned, battered and breathing hard, saying the Whites were only a few miles away. By nightfall, they would be upon the ring fort. Men donned armor, checked weapons, muttered prayers. Daenerys perched atop Drogon, scanning the horizon with anxious eyes. Stannis walked the lines, giving curt nods to trembling soldiers. Tarly mustered the men of the Reach in disciplined ranks, while Tormund led wildlings to the forward positions, cackling that at least they'd die free. Roose Bolton and the Grey Jon took up positions on the flanks. Ned found himself at the southern arc of the ring fort, ready to meet the brunt of the assault. Jon readied Rhaegal in the center, though the dragon could only half-fly, enough to hop short distances and breathe fire from vantage points. Darkness fell quickly. Torches and braziers lit the fortress, reflecting off the swirling snow. The hush before the storm was unbearable. Then the horns sounded from every wall. Shapes emerged from the gloom, a sea of them, black silhouettes in a white wasteland. Eyes glowed with that eerie blue. The line stretched wider than anything they had yet seen. At the center, Ned glimpsed taller forms, White Walkers. And behind them, a figure astride a monstrous undead creature, an undead giant or some twisted beast, it was hard to tell. The Night King, his crown of horns faintly visible. No battle cries came from the dead. Only a dreadful silence broken by the hiss of wind. The living tensed, hearts pounding. Then, in a tidal rush, the Whites charged, surging toward the ring fort from every direction. The horns of men blared. Archers loosed arrow after arrow. Siege weapons hurled flaming pitch. A ring of fire bloomed, incinerating the front lines of Whites. Screams and crackles rent the air. But still they came, wave upon wave, piling over the burning corpses, unstoppable in their mindless hunger. Daenerys sent Drogon diving, blasting a huge swath of the undead in a torrent of fire. Hundreds fell, thrashing in the flames. On the ground, Rhaegal hopped along the perimeter, spewing gouts of flame that turned the Whites to ash. Tarly's spearmen held firm, stabbing repeatedly with dragonglass tips. Wildlings hurled axes, ignoring their own injuries. Northmen fired volley after volley of obsidian arrows. Men roared, commanded, prayed. The fortress glowed with the inferno of constant flame. Amid the chaos, Ned's sword rose and fell, striking down White after White. His arms throbbed, but he kept going. Stannis led a disciplined group near the fortress gate. Tormund anchored a corner, hacking wildly at anything that moved. The Greyjohn's laughter boomed somewhere in the madness. The ground became slick with gore and half-melted snow. A flash of motion to the northeast signaled the arrival of the White Walkers. They strode into the fray, freezing the flames with the chill that emanated from their very bodies. One wave of their arms and the Whites pressed harder. Men cried out as ice blades clove through steel. Still, the defenders refused to break. Ser Brienne rallied a pocket of Tyrell Knights, cutting down a White Walker in a fearless charge. It disintegrated under her dragonglass-tipped lance, a crystalline shriek lost in the storm. Another White Walker unleashed a gust of frost that extinguished a swath of torches, plunging men into darkness. Ned glimpsed Bolton's men lighting wildfire, sending green flames roaring across a cluster of undead. The smell was horrendous, a mix of burning flesh and chemicals. Above, Drogon soared, peppered by ice spears that soared from the White Walkers below. Daenerys dodged as best she could, but one spear grazed Drogon's flank, causing him to roar in pain. She pulled him higher, uncertain. Rhaegal, hampered by his wing, stayed closer to the ground, belching fire at wights that tried to scale the ringfort's walls. Jon commanded him carefully, mindful of more incoming spears. The entire fortress was a battlefield of swirling flame, ice, screams, and curses. Then the center parted and the Night King advanced. He rode a colossal wight, once a giant, now a twisted behemoth with vacant blue eyes and patches of rotting flesh. The giant pounded forward, smashing aside men and walls alike. The Night King surveyed the fortress from atop that horror as if choosing his moment to strike. Ned rallied what men he could. This was the moment. If they could lure him into the center, they might encircle him. But the giant wight crashed through a wall, scattering defenders. Blood sprayed. The great Jon led a charge, only to be batted aside, men sent flying. The fortress was cracking underfoot, stones toppling, trenches filling with corpses. Daenerys saw her opening and dived with Drogon, unleashing a torrent of flame aimed directly at the Night King. Fire engulfed the giant wight below, causing it to thrash in agony. But the Night King stood untouched, an aura of chill repelling the flames. He hurled an ice spear that Drogon barely managed to avoid by pulling up. Daenerys cursed, circling again, uncertain how to strike. If she got too close, one well-thrown spear could end her. Her face was tight with desperation. At that moment, Jon appeared with Rhaegal. The greenish dragon hopped forward in a short leap, blasting fire at the giant's legs. Under the combined heat, the giant's rotted flesh began to slough away, the skeleton blackening. The giant roared, toppling to one knee. The Night King leapt off its shoulder, landing nimbly in the midst of the chaos. That was the chance they'd been waiting for. Ned signaled. Tarly's men and the wildlings converged, ringed by Northmen with dragonglass spears. The White Walkers rushed to protect their master, but Daenerys swooped overhead, pouring flames that cut them off. The ring closed. Within that ring, the Night King stood alone, except not quite alone. He raised both hands. Immediately, corpses nearby lurched upright again, bolstering him. But the living were ready this time. Stannis, Tormund, Brienne, and Ned all led simultaneous charges from different sides. The ring of spears advanced, forcing the Whites to step into the waiting arcs of Valyrian steel. The Night King glided backward, looking for an opening to escape. Each path was blocked by flame, spear, or sword. Ned lunged in, aiming ice at the Night King's torso. The creature batted the blade aside with an ice sword, sending frost rippling along the Valyrian steel. Tormund came from the left, brandishing a dragonglass axe. The Night King ducked, flipping Tormund onto his back. Stannis jabbed from behind with his rumored Lightbringer. Sparks of frost flew as blade met blade. The great Jon, battered though he was, hurled a spear that shattered on the Night King's armor. Each clash made the air crackle with cold energy. The Night King spun, his movements unnaturally swift. Brienne thrust her dragonglass lance, but he caught it, fracturing the tip. He slammed her aside. The ring tightened, men driving Whites away with spears. For a heartbeat, the Night King was truly encircled by Ned, Stannis, Tormund, the Great Jon, Brienne, and a handful of others, all wielding dragonglass or Valyrian steel. Daenerys soared overhead, raining flame to prevent more Whites from interfering. The swirling heat turned the air into a furnace, but the center was a swirl of ice-laced wind. Ned's breath caught. Now was the moment. A half-dozen blades stabbed toward the Night King. He deflected or dodged them with preternatural grace. One slash from Tormund's axe cut across his chest, drawing a spiderweb of cracks. Another thrust from Stannis opened a fracture in his side. The Night King lashed out with a gauntlet hand of ice that sent men flying, but Ned closed in, swinging ice in a heavy, two-handed strike. The blade crunched through the Night King's left shoulder, cracking it. A shriek ripped the night air. The Great Jon seized the chance, burying his own dragonglass dagger into the creature's side. The Night King reeled, a torrent of freezing mist erupting from the wounds. He glared at Ned, those inhuman eyes burning with ancient hatred. With a snarl that was almost human, he raised his ice sword, swinging it at Ned's head. Ned barely managed to parry, though the impact numbed his arms to the elbows. Stannis tried to thrust from behind again, but the Night King twisted, snapping the king's spear in two. Another wave of frost pulsed outward, knocking half the men on their backs. The Great John lost his grip on the dagger, leaving it embedded in the Night King's side. Ned, battered but on his feet, mustered the last of his strength. He rushed forward before the Night King could recover. Ice glowed with a strange reflection of the flames around them. He brought the sword down in a diagonal slash, aiming for the Night King's chest. The blade bit deep, fracturing the icy armor, cutting into the being's core. A keening wail, higher than any mortal voice, erupted. The Night King stumbled. An aura of swirling frost swelled, threatening to sweep Ned away. But Ned held on, pressing the blade deeper until he felt the Night King's icy form give way. Cracks spread across the Night King's entire body, branching out in brilliant lines of azure light. With one final, ear-splitting shriek, he shattered. Chunks of ice and shadowy vapor exploded outward, then dissolved into the air. The ring of defenders staggered back, shielding their faces from the blast. For a heartbeat, there was only silence. Then, as if a spell had broken, the surrounding wights collapsed. Hundreds, thousands of them, toppled like puppets with cut strings, their glowing eyes extinguished all at once. White walkers across the battlefield froze in place, then likewise cracked apart or dissolved into swirling snow. The entire fortress fell, eerily quiet, the only sound the hiss of steam from the lingering flames. Men stared, disbelieving. Daenerys, atop Drogon, circled overhead, seeing the entire horde drop. A roar of astonished triumph rose from the living. Tormund, panting and bruised, let out a wild laugh. Stannis sank to one knee, clutching at his wounds. The Great John spat blood, but a grin split his face. Brienne bent to help him stand. Ned stood in the midst of the ruined ring, ice still in his hands, trembling with fatigue. He stared at the empty space where the Night King had been, half afraid the fiend would reform. But only snow drifts remained, swirling in the wind. One by one, the living discovered that the enemy truly was gone. The wights had fallen inert, free folk corpses, northern corpses, and southern corpses alike. The White Walkers had disintegrated upon their master's destruction. Over the next hour, more cheers and tears spread through the fortress. Men embraced, some prayed, some stumbled to find fallen comrades. A hush of wonder replaced the clangor of battle. After all the terror, it was over. The dead were done. Daenerys landed Drogon near the battered center, dismounting quickly and rushing to Ned. She studied him, breathing fast. He was covered in blood and ice shards, but he managed a weary nod. She smiled, tears glistening in her eyes, and clutched his hand. "You did it, Lord Stark." He exhaled, letting Ice's point rest on the ground. "We all did," he said hoarsely. Jon slid from Rhaegal's back, limping over. "Is it?" Ned nodded, voice unsteady. "He's gone, Jon. Truly gone." Jon bowed his head, relief coursing through him. Stannis approached as well, battered but alive, gazing at Ned with an expression of respect. "A well-struck blow," he said, his tone subdued. "The realm owes you a debt." Ned shook his head. "We all owe each other." It was the unity that won this day. Across the ring fort, men began to chant victory cries, though many simply collapsed in exhaustion. The swirling blizzard eased, as if the very weather had been tied to the Night King's presence. Stars became visible in the clearing sky. Fires still burned, but now they were celebratory, thawing the hearts that had been locked in fear for so long. It would take time for the news to spread. Time for the rest of Westeros to learn that the long night had been averted. But in that moment, in the ring fort that had seen so much bloodshed, the living knew they had prevailed against the greatest threat in memory. Daenerys embraced Ser Jorah, who approached unsteadily. Stannis clasped arms with Tormund, ignoring the many insults they had traded. The Great John roared triumph, calling for ale they did not have. Brienne knelt to pray quietly for the souls lost. Bolton's men stood uncertainly, but even they wore faint smiles, for once. Ned looked around. Bodies littered the ground, too many dead to count. Yet those who remained alive had saved the world of men. He felt an odd calm and understanding that everything after this would be shaped by the fact that they had stood together. The realm might still face political upheaval, kings, queens, lords, and there would be strife enough in the days to come. But the doom that threatened to end all life had been defeated here, in the bitter cold beyond the wall. And the man who had once knelt in the great September of Baelor, ready to die at Joffrey's whim, had lived to wield the sword that ended the Night King. The old gods were not done with Eddard Stark, it seemed. He sheathed ice with trembling hands, feeling tears sting his eyes as he thought of the countless sacrifices, old friends, loyal men, even one of Daenerys's dragons. The cost had been staggering. But he found comfort in the knowledge that his children might see a future free from the undead terror. If Arya still lived, she could roam the world without fear of winter's whites. Sansa could stand tall in Winterfell, no longer a hostage. Bran, Rickon, Robb, none of them would know the endless night. That was worth any price. Jon placed a hand on Ned's shoulder. Father, we should see to the wounded. Make sure the watchers in other parts of the field know it's over. Ned nodded. Yes, we should. Let on, Jon. Our duty continues. They walked away from the shattered circle, picking their path among the fallen. Men lifted torches, discovering survivors, pulling them free from the rubble. Some wept over lost friends. Others murmured prayers of thanks to the old gods and the new. Daenerys joined them shortly, her regal bearing tempered by compassion. She knelt to console a dying soldier in Tyrell armor, promising him his sacrifice had saved the realm. Stannis limped toward a group of knights, beckoning them to gather the bodies for a final burning. The night sky glistened with distant stars, the northern lights swirling in faint colors above. A sense of peace settled, an almost mystical hush following the storm of battle. Smoke rose, carrying the scent of bitter victory. From the ashes of this conflict, the kingdoms of men would be forced to forge a new future, one in which they all remembered what they could accomplish when united and what horrors awaited if they turned on each other again. Ned paused at a slight rise, gazing across the silent valley. Already the wind was blowing snow over the fallen whites, burying them in white. With the Night King gone, they would remain lifeless lumps of bone and rotted flesh. In the east, the first hints of dawn's glow touched the horizon. Winter was still here, but the long night had been turned back. He closed his eyes, feeling tears freeze on his lashes, and breathed a quiet prayer to the old gods, thankful for the chance to protect his children, his people, and all the realm. Whatever came next, scheming lords, southern disputes, the matter of who would wear the crown seemed small in comparison. They had looked into the face of utter darkness and refused to yield. In that fleeting peace, Ned Stark felt an echo of hope. There would be time to mourn, time to rebuild, time to decide the fate of Westeros. For now at least, they had life. The living had prevailed. And Eddard Stark, who once stood so close to death beneath the bright sun of King's Landing, who had borne false confession and swallowed his pride to save his family, now stood victorious in the cold dawn of the true North, having fulfilled his final vow. To guard the realms of men against the darkness that knew no mercy. He opened his eyes to the first pale rays of the sun and whispered, "Winter may come, but together we endure." And the light, at long last, returned to the world.